Mysteries.
Take her to the moon for me, okay?
Okay, guys, we're going to the moon. Okay, guys, going home.
You're listening to Moon Mysteries, hosted by Kayleigh and Gator. A show based on the mysteries of the moon and all of its folklores. From its origin story to its purpose and function, even how it affects our emotions. There will be 2 shows a month. One focused on the astrological placements and transitions of the moon that month, and the other they'll be focused on an interesting guest giving their perspectives, insights, and research on the history and mystery of the moon. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure to like, share, subscribe with all of your cosmonaut friends, and get ready to dive into Moon Mysteries.
Welcome to Moon Mysteries. My name is Kayleigh.
And I'm Gator.
I am super stoked to talk to you guys today about some really interesting moon mysteries. Today we actually have a special guest. I have my teacher, Gemini Brett, with us, joining us to talk about the solar and lunar calendar weirdness and anomalies. Specifically, we're going to be diving into the Chinese New Year and how that is supposed to go, and some of the interesting and fun stuff going on with that calendar. Not really sure where we're going to start or where this is going to go, but that's usually how it goes with us. So let's begin this flow, and I'm super excited to be bringing my teacher into this episode. So
let's start with Happy New Year.
Happy New Year!
Yay!
That's a good place to start.
And it's good to be here. But what is a year?
What is a year?
We ask this every time.
Yeah, like, can we start? What is a year? Why do we have this? You know, we're talking about calendars today, right? That's good. It's going to be happening a lot of the calendar conversation. How do you feel truly about the modern calendar, the modern Western calendar, that we sit on here in America, where we're at?
The Empire's calendar?
Yeah, the Empire's calendar. Can you tell us a little bit about your ideology on that?
It's a mysterious thing. You know, I'm actually finding it less disharmonic than it was promoted to be to me when you read like the post from the Awakened and how we have to reclaim our connection to the true 13 moon calendar, or else we're just going to continue to serve the intentional disruption of time that takes us away from the natural flow. And, you know, there's some reality to that. But one thing that's important, I think, to know is that when you follow the sun through 12 sunths, as I like to call them. So we should need to talk about months and sunths. But let me just say this, like if we divide the year, right, a solar year, Earth's orbit of the sun, into 12s, then it takes the sun on average 30.44 days to move through each of the 12 equal divisions of space, right? Which in astrology we call signs, yeah? So alternating between 30 and 31, like actually kind of keeps solar time in a way. It's not arranged in such a way that really works. And then you have the strangeness of February, which Tom Robbins called as worthless as the extra R in its name. I don't agree, by the way, but it's an interesting thing. And then you get that February 28 and sometimes 29 because of the way that we do leap year. So we're going to get into some fun calendar calisthenics, calendar kung fu. There will be some math here, friends. That's just how it is. We're going to talk about like old math versus new math too, because a lot of this was like the code was cracked before the decimal point and in many places before the zero. But it's tricky to kind of tame the rhythms of silver and gold, of the moon and the sun. And, you know, that's part of the issue, because one of my like general intents in sharing my work is to help people realign to natural time, right? And a great thing is for those who are starting to follow astrology, like if you keep new moon and full moon, especially ceremoniously, and if you follow the sun through the tropical signs, like you are like organically realigning to natural time. But some of us, like the three of us, I think, are also really intrigued to figure this out on the intellectual level too, like learning how to keep the days again. And for me, like calendar kung fu, it's like a master class that's really necessary for any starry student to step into like a deep and grounded awareness of the marriage of heaven and earth.
I get asked about why don't we have 13 signs and why don't we have 13 months all the dang time?
Yeah.
There's a swath of misinformation out there. It's kind of like,
yeah. And I think that would be a great place to kind of like, I mean, right now would be a great time to kind of address that, and then we can dive into the rest of it, because I can't explain it very well. So, you know, I'm newer to that area of study, so why not 13, Brett?
Well, let's say first, like, why 13? Or why are people claiming 13, right? I mean, we would like for our months to be aligned to the moons, right, for which they are named. And it's just not as easy to do as many claim. Like, in a past life, in this lifetime, I was a touring musician, and my band would play a lot with a band that was practicing the Jose Arguelles dream spell calendar, which I think it's really important to say is not the Mayan calendar. It's often promoted in that way. It's actually a couple days off, and some interesting tweaks and changes were made. I find it to be an interesting thing. But, you know, like when I'm told that I'm a yellow galactic seed, that really doesn't speak for the day of my birth and day keeping time and like in the Mayan worlds, right? So anyway, there was a particular band that would actually choose the one key they would play in every night based upon this dream spell calendar.
oh, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I found it to be totally intriguing, and this was before my like astrological awakening began, right? So I would have been more interested in it now. However, you know, they would make this claim that, you know, if we didn't all realign to the true 13 moon calendar, like the whole ship is going to sink. And so it's like, okay, well, what is the 13 moon calendar? It's like, well, you know, if you actually know that the lunar cycle is 28 days, 13 times 28 is 364 days. And of course, there's like 365 days in a year. So you get your 13 moons of 28 days each. And then you just add a day. There's a day at a time. And then you're good. Well, the issue is the lunar cycle is not 28 days. There is no 28-day lunar cycle. So in this like quest to realign to natural time, it's being promoted by people who aren't looking at the sky. Right? I mean, I was just staring for a book on my shelf. I really want to find it actually, but it's called 13 Moons, and it's a collection of poems that are really beautiful. But in the back, it's like talking about how so many native cultures use this 13 moon calendar, which is the actual calendar, and it talks about 13 28-day cycles each year. I mean, even if the lunar cycle was 28 days, 364 is not 365, right? Like and the solar year, right, which is our orbit of the sun, right? This is astronomically what a year is. I think we all know this. The reason for the seasons is Earth's rotational axis or rotational plane is tilted in respect to our orbital plane. And so we have this great Earth sun cycle we call a solar year or a tropical year. I'll call a golden year. And it's 365 and about a quarter days. So I actually want to return to the issue of the about a quarter days, which is going to bring us into the weirdness of like why the Julian calendar started slipping, why the empire needed to have the Gregorian reform. That's like a whole other thing, and we should actually return to that because it's brilliant. And it would be fun today to address a more organic way to deal with the fractions of days beyond 365 every year. That's something I'm really a proponent for now, and it will be a fun thing to try to get into. It gets a little bit more complicated because I think we can utilize some of the models of like Mayan time or Mesoamerican time as we describe that region of the world now, because so many of the cultures down there in current day, Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, we're utilizing these like sacred counts of 260 days and a 365-day calendar. And so let's get back to that. Let's stick with the moon. It's weird enough. And I know this is the moon mysteries anyway, right? So if the moon cycle is not 28 days, how long is it?
Yeah.
And so here the issue also is which moon cycle?
Right. The synodic or the sidereal?
Or the draconic or the anomalistic, or they go on and on and on. However, most cultures who are utilizing a lunisolar or soli-lunar calendar, right? These calendars that do tie the strange polyrhythms of silver, the moon, and gold, the sun together, are working with the synodic cycle of the moon. Synod means meeting, right? So this is from Earth's point of view, the monthly meetings of the moon and the sun in our sky, which we call a new moon, right? Moon conjunct sun. Now, that being said, most of these cultures were using the visual experience of the moon. And that means you're not going to start it at the mathematical new moon, because unless you're in eclipse season and you're on the earth in these places where you experience a solar eclipse during that meeting of moon and sun, a new moon is a no moon, right? You can't see the moon. There's so many prophecies of, 3 days of darkness. And from the Earth's experience, like we have that with the moon basically every month, the day before moon conjoins the sun, to speak astrologically, or really astronomically, right? The day before the new moon, the day of the new moon, and the day after the new moon are kind of typically this period where there's no moon for you, right? She's there, she's either waxing or waning, but because we can't have a visual experience of her, right? It's like the no moon time. And it's wonderful to work with that quite intentionally, right? And go into darkness and go inside. And I guess we can talk more about practices as we move along, but to kind of stick with the nerd stuff, or let's not say that, the nature stuff, when does your month begin? And an interesting thing, and I'm going to just like diverge now actually into this other problem. What is a day? And when does the day begin? Okay, so let's go to a smaller period of time, which is actually maybe easier to wrestle with astronomically. And then we'll bring it back to the month, okay? I don't think today's for hours and minutes and seconds. Those are really intriguing also, maybe a little bit more arbitrary. But the day is not, right? I mean, I have a lot of folks, and I'm sure you get this one too, that will tell you that like time is just invented. It's a human construct, right? That like astrology is a human construct, like the 12 signs of the zodiac. They're like, there's nothing real to them. Like, it's just this thing that people have invented. And if we invent it and then believe in it, right, long enough, then it works. And, I think there's tropical. So sidereal, tropical, whatever. I mean, I think there's some there's some beauty to that, right? There is some truth in like, we will see what we believe.
I think
And
of it
the
kind of
more
like
people on the team.
I kind of think of it like electricity, you know. It's like it's something that we've funneled and we've kind of like gotten to use to our advantage because we've understood our atmosphere. We've understood what's happening, you know, like that this is years and years and years of observation and massive amounts of community work to put these things together. Just like how we don't create electricity, it's there. We were funneling it and we are bringing it to our reality. And so I kind of think the same thing with time is like time's always been there. These archetypes and what have you of astrology, they're always there. We have done our duty to observe them and as a community bring them into our reality. That's what I say to people who, you know, like time is not real.
Really
Time is
great
very
example.
real.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, you know, tell me that, and as I watch your face wrinkle, right? It says Saturn. And that's a great example, Gator. Well, how about this one? You know, whoever gets here first, just feel free to jump in. What is 2 plus 3?
5.
5, right? Okay,
Five,
so
yes.
Is this a trick question?
No, 2 plus 3 is 5. Is that something that we invented, or is it something we discovered? Oh. And I think we can all agree it's something we discovered. So, Gator, as you're speaking about, you know, kind of discovering the truth that we can take that force of electricity and generate power, right, through the advent of technology and whatnot, right? This is a discovery, and then there's developments there. Like 2 plus 3 equals 5. That's just truth, and it's not an invention. It's a discovery. And I will say that is true also. I mean, like, what are the actual tropical signs of the zodiac? Why are they a thing? That's a long story. I don't know that we go there today, but we can certainly say, you know, is the period of a day invented or discovered? And the answer is it's discovered. And all you have to do is go outside. I mean, I recommend sleeping outside for a few days' time, and you'll really get to know like how profound this powerful cycle of yin and yang that happens every day is, right? Like a lot of people will go to the tidal forces of the moon and the sun, but interestingly, you know, while from a modern physics point of view, the gravitational pull of the sun is so much stronger than that of the moon, the tidal force of the moon is stronger than that of the sun here on Earth. And the reason is the moon is so much closer to us. I can like go deeper there if you'd like, but I think we have other things to do too. So the moon controls the tides. Our Earth is 70+% water. You are 70+% water. Why wouldn't you have tides too? Why wouldn't the pole of the moon and also of the sun and even of Jupiter, who we can like measure the tidal effects here on Earth of, like, why wouldn't they pull on your waters also, right? And so many people to kind of make an argument for the case for astrology and the idea that like these heavenly beings would have some kind of energetic participation with our experience as earthlings. Many will go to the tidal forces, right, as like exhibit A. I think it's exhibit B because exhibit A is night and day, right? If on the side of like what I'll call like material astrology, which I feel is rooted in this idea that astronomical events have energetic participation with our experience as earthlings, night and day is like exhibit A. Right? The flowers open to receive the light and close at night to dream and rest, and we should too. Or like harmonically, our hormone system, however you say that, like we're designed to do so, right? Like I love the musician life, you know, bless those on the graveyard shift or whatever. But in general, like we can feel that essence of a day beginning at sunrise and the night beginning when the sun sets. Right. And as we know, we can look at that also through the seasons, and in the winter time, the night time is much longer than the daylight and that, you know, but even if we look at this energy of the seasons, that I feel is like exhibit C, right? So exhibit A, day, exhibit B, month, exhibit C, year. And if we just break down like those periods of time, which get actually really complicated, especially when you try to work with their rhythms together, the day I think is the easiest to understand. It's certainly the one that we can experience most quickly, right? It's like go outside and watch the sunrise like in the middle of the day. And by the way, because we're going to talk some today about natural time versus civil time or empire time, like the middle of the day is not 12 p.m. on your clock, friends. All right. It is when the sun is for that particular day highest in the sky. It is halfway in time between sunrise and sunset, where the three of us live and everywhere on earth north of the Tropic of Cancer. It is when the sun is due south in your local experience every day, because the sun at that time, halfway in time between sunrise and sunset, true midday or true solar noon. These days, we used to call it noon. Now we have to call it local apparent solar noon. Right? That's because the sun is highest at that time on that day. The shadow of a stick or like you is shortest, right? And so one of the ways that we've really learned to keep the days is by standing tall and watching our shadows sweep from the west as the sun is rising in the east to the east as the sun is setting in the west. And in the middle of the day, when the sun is either south or north, depending on where on earth you stand, your shadow is shortest, right? And so that sundial has kind of become the clock, if you will, which is really modeled on the sun's movement through the northern hemisphere sky during the day. But we can certainly agree that at least if we follow the light, a solar day is sunrise to sunrise. Does that feel right? Starting days at sunrise?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Yes. Yeah. And then having like the concept of a lunar day starting when the sun, sun sets and the dusk begins, and having no nights and only days, like, or I guess, having a hermetic split is good. But yeah, I like that conceptually. I feel like that is when the day begins, because in the middle of the night at 12 p.m., it doesn't at all feel like a new day,
Right.
and you'll be up at 2 a.m., diving deep into whatever it is that you're doing, on your house, cleaning your gutters and what have you. And you'll still feel like it's the day before. So, that there's that sad, I'm not an astrologer, but I love using the astrological terms, like that Saturnian overlord feeling of, the time and the compartmentalization of us being put into boxes. And that's what time is. When people say, time is this construct, and, it's only used for our control, but it's also used for our ability to seize our optimization as humans, I feel like. And there is a sense of control that's happening on some sort of empire. You call it the empire. I'm missing the word again. What do you call it? The empire clock?
So civil time is a way it's often said, or to speak in like Saturnian terms, there's Chronos and there's Kairos. And, look, we need to have some kind of agreement on civil time so we can make our meeting to talk about time, right? or get to the plane, or, whatever it may be. It's not wrong to have an agreement on a calendar. It would just be wonderful if we could find a more natural expression of it, right? I mean, we could say, hey, meet me like 3 days after the first quarter moon for, ticks after sunset or something.
I wish.
But still, like, it's really convenient to say, hey, we're going to start this thing at 11:21 a.m. Pacific time on this calendar date, right? It's just saying, okay, yeah, well, we, especially in this kind of technological World Wide Web age where we can all connect in this way, we don't need, but it's very good to have agreement on a calendar. Let's just also agree to make that calendar more aligned to natural time. And while I don't think I'm going to convince the presidents and the Pope of this necessarily, we could start a culture that's choosing to use a more natural calendar and the way that we keep the hours and the days and the months and the years. And we could basically, I think, organically from the root birth a more natural culture as a result. There's so many things that we didn't really seem to agree to. We're just born into this idea that, 1 + 1 is 2. And again, I think that's quite true. I think that's a discovery, not a creation. Negative numbers get a little bit more interesting. Even the idea of what is 0 gets pretty interesting, and that, I diverge, but also just in the language, and especially the way that the language is completely recreated, sometimes organically, sometimes not, right? There's all these things that we just were born into that we didn't necessarily, or I don't know how it works. Maybe we did that. I feel like I didn't sign up for. So I'm kind of, it's like, wait, why is that? Well, what is a day? What is a month? Why would we work with it that way? Why fit 28 days in February, or sometimes 29, like it's extra R, or, and as we ask these questions, and especially if we go out to the big screen, which is the sky, and celebrate the marriage of the heavens and earth, and ask the questions of nature, right? The answers are actually more simple than they are when we try to tackle this mathematically or try to express this in word alone, but they're still quite complex. But let's talk about starting the day in the middle of the night, right? Which is most of what we mostly do. 12 a.m. on the clock, very importantly, is not true midnight, which happens halfway between sunset and sunrise from your local experience. I like to call sunset sunrest, and this middle of the night thing sunroot, because it's when, from your local experience, the sun stops going down beneath your local ground and starts coming up. So if we did realign, just philosophically, starting a day when, though we cannot see it, the sun begins his daily climb, there's something to it, and most of us are celebrating this January 1st, New Year's, and I think 80% of humans live north of Earth's equator. So a great percentage of humanity is experiencing the beginning of their year, also in the midnight of the year. We should talk about why January 1st and why not solstice if you're going to do that. But for now, let me just say, when we look at winter solstice, spring equinox, summer solstice, autumnal equinox, right? And these great stations of the Earth-Sun orbit, the year cycle, right? You can see the very clear analog to sunrise, that's like spring, sun reach, which is I call the midday sun getting to its highest height, that's like summer. Sun rest, sun setting in the west is like autumn, equinox. Then we go into the darkness. In the middle of that dark period would be sun rooting down below the ground, and that's I can't say the word. It's equivalent, it's like to the winter solstice. So that in our society, most people are not only aligned to this idea that the day begins in the middle of the night, but also that the year begins at the darkest time. Is a pretty intriguing thing. Do you know, is it a commitment to the darkness, or is it a commitment to the rebirth of the light? And really, we're keeping in our culture mythic solar time. And even if it was taught that way, it would be so much more epic, right? But if you compare the sun, S-O-N, to the sun, S-U-N, you might get burned at the stake, less so these days. But that's clearly what's going on here in an empire calendar, which was configured to the empire's religion, right? Celebrating the birth of the sun and the resurrection of the sun and these things, right? So even if we leave the moon out of it for a second and talk about solar time, right? The solar day, the solar year. That's where I'm finding Some resonance with the Gregorian calendar, which was the Julian calendar. Like they're really trying to
Can I ask you a
align our
question on that too? If you
Sure.
don't mind, because there's some very strange number magic happening with that. The Pope Gregory the 13th, supposedly right now, the Gregorian calendar is 13 days behind what the Julian calendar would be. And it's named after Pope Gregory the 13th. But then you have all this like, we should be, we should be, on this 13 moon calendar. And then there's, the 13th letter of the alphabet is like the letter M, and 13, 31. There's a lot of strange number, weird mysticism going on there. And, for all of our, esoteric devotees out there that have miles and miles of work to read through, we know that astrology and pulling down the sun and the moon work in like divination practices and things. And I'm wondering what your take is on if there's any like sort of strange magic happening at a higher echelon level. And or the other question is, Pope Gregory wasn't the astrologer that brought this. Who was the astrologer that brought this calendar and named it after Pope Gregory? Who was this? Because I don't know who that is. All you hear is Pope Gregory, but he's not an astrologer, right?
You know what? I'm sad to say I cannot answer that question. I have a book here called The Sun in the Church.
Oh.
And a book here. What is that other book? There's so many books on the shelf that I'm intending to read, but I think that could answer that question. I mean, one thing that I know to be true is that when it was realized that the Julian calendar was not keeping solar time as it was intended to do, an interesting thing is all of these astrology books, which had been buried, I mean, so many of them burned by the church, had to get the ones that weren't burned, like dusted off to figure out what the heck was going on here. Like some pope, or not pope, but priest, I remember reading, was claiming that things were out of whack because Adam recorded the first Monday wrong, right? Like people just didn't know, right? And this is, I think, a really brilliant reminder of the illness when we choose to believe that we have advanced technologically to the point where the way that our elders and the ancient ones worked with the rhythms are no longer relevant, right? It's like, oops, you need an update. So, I mean, fortunately, like the ancient cultures had figured this out. So here's Chinese New Year, right? This calendar has been running for a long time. I'm sorry to say I can't exactly say how long. The Hebrew calendar, which really comes from the Akkadian calendar, from the Babylonian calendar, like that is way back. When I spent like 2 manic, sleepless nights, like doing the calendar kung fu and cracking the code some years ago. And in the end, I was like, oh, I called it the Rebrew calendar because I just made the Hebrew calendar when I like sorted out the way that we could like realign silver and gold in time and the days. And my calendar wasn't quite as good, but it was really close. And it's like, wow, like all they had to do is ask the cats next door. Right. But can't do that. So, yeah. I remember it being Emperor Sixtus V. There's so not only were these astrology books like they have to be dusted off and whatnot, so we could actually learn like what a year was. That was the problem. And let me speak a little bit more to that in just a bit. I'll just say that also that's when these churches, these like Catholic churches started employing all of these like rose lines that track like the like solar projections or through like little holes in the ceiling onto the church floor, and they crawl up the wall and they walk like a plaque rose line of the astrology signs. All my astronomy for astrologers, or I like to call it sacred astronomy students, have traveled with me virtually to the Vatican to explore my favorite astrology calendar, which is based upon the shadow of a stolen obelisk from Egypt, right? So you have this amazing pagan symbol right in the center of St. Peter's Square, all right, which is like this really beautiful, not square, but oval. And it keeps the year, it keeps the day. I mean, they've fashioned a nifty cross on top of this gigantic stolen obelisk. And there's a legend that Christ's remains are in the ball of that cross on top of this obelisk, by the way. But the obelisk itself, my understanding is it was originally erected in Heliopolis in Egypt, and it was taken from there by Caesar and brought to Alexandria, named for Alexander in Egypt, right, which is the birthplace of quote unquote Western astrology, the Hellenistic advent. And then it was moved from Egypt to Rome by Caligula. And it was then moved from its original location in Rome into the center of St. Peter's Square by Emperor Sixtus V. And now it's this amazing calendar. So it works like a sundial, right? You can just see the shadow moving from the west when the sun rises in the east, to the north when the sun reaches in the south, as it does in all earthly locations north of the Earth's Tropic of Cancer, like Rome, and then sets in the west, so the shadow points east at that time, right? So you can watch that shadow keeping the day, the solar day, from sunrise to sunset, sunrise, sunreach, sunrest. And it also keeps the year. So let's talk a little bit about the genius of the meridian calendar at the Vatican in St. Peter's Square quickly. So the middle of the day, right? Again, not like noon on the clock, not 12 p.m., but rather sunreach, the height of the sun. That's either where you're living due south, that's like typically the northern hemisphere experience, or the sun will reach due north if you live south of the Tropic of Capricorn, so it's southern hemisphere. The tropics actually get more interesting. I don't think we need to go there right now. But sun reach, sunrise, sun reach, sun rest. So I'm just going to speak northern hemisphere to try to keep it a little bit more simple. Let's just call that east, the sun rising in the east, the sun reaching in the south, the sun resting in the west, okay? So the sun reach it's south every day. It's at the meridian every day. Like if I'm at St. Peter's Square, every day, the shortest shadow cast by that obelisk is pointing due north because the sun is due south, okay? And, you know, this is a way that we can actually align ourselves to the directions of Earth. And as I like to say, the spine of Gaia, or the sword of our stone, or the world tree. Because truthfully, the cardinal directions are not defined by magnetism. They're defined by Earth's rotational axis, right? So like Santa's place, the North Pole, like that is one of the poles of our rotation, right? And that's, of course, the day. Modern astronomical thought, you have a huge camp on YouTube who will debate this, but is that, you know, we are experiencing day and night. Why? Because the Earth is rotating, right? And at least in respect to the sun, so like sunrise to sunrise, or midday to midday, or sunset to sunset, midnight to midnight's actually the hardest one to measure or experience because we can't see the sun, right?
Yeah.
That's this 24-hour period, as we've come to call it, right? And that's the solar day. So the way that here at St. Peter's Square, or anywhere you put a stick in the ground, you can work with the solar day, is working with the shadow. And truthfully, because there's hills and trees or houses or other things on the horizons, and because midday is also typically more clear, that's hard to say, you know, but the easiest solar event to measure daily is midday. Because if you put a stick in the ground, you just measure the shortest shadow. And this is like the old camper's trick. If you're out and about and you want to like align yourself to natural time and to Earth's directions, put a stick in the ground and just like take a string and measure the shadow throughout the day, and you just draw those shadows on the line, the shortest shadow is pointing north or pointing south if you're in the southern hemisphere, right? I mean, it's cool. And once you get north, you have south. Like if I point my heart to the north, my back is south, and my shoulders are east and west. I'm now like centered into the cardinal directions of Earth. And I'm hoping we can return to that when I kind of speak about a more organic leap year, okay? So what is leap year? What's the necessity of it? How did that work in the Julian calendar? How did that work in the Gregorian calendar? Let's be there. But let me just finish with St. Peter's Square. The midday sun is the highest sun of the day. But of course, it's much higher in summer than it is in winter, right? This is one of our experiences of Earth's tilt, of the tilt of our day plane, our rotation, to our year plane, our orbit, right? Is that we have seasons. And we all know that winter solstice brings the lowest sun in our sky, right? Midday sun. And therefore, the longest shadow. Low sun equals long shadow. You've all experienced this. The sun is setting and your shadow is the long arm of the law. You know, it's like forever. At midday, the shadow is going to be shortest, but the shortest shadow of the year is the midday sun at summer solstice, because that's the highest the sun will get in the sky. One of the codes for that, by the way, is the glory of the king. And that high sun in the sky is going to cast the shortest shadow of the year. So this astrological calendar, which it truly is, at the Vatican, which is just a fun thing to tell people when they're trying to persecute me based upon, you know, doing the devil's work. It's like, well, let me show you the meridian line at the Vatican in St. Peter's Square with these bronze circles that have the astrology signs and tell you when the sun is moving through not the stars, but through the tropical signs of the zodiac, and shows you the solstices and the equinoxes and these things, but literally will show you like Taurus and Gemini, etc. Like the way that works is the midday shadow during the course of the year, right? It will always be the shortest shadow of the day, but the shortest shadow, it's like almost no shadow at all, is midday summer solstice. And then from there, every midday when the shadow norths, because the sun is south, every day the shadow gets longer, right? And so between winter solstice, the longest shadow, midday shadow, and summer solstice, the shortest midday shadow, you get to see the shadow like getting shorter and shorter every day, like rushing at equinox time and then really slowing down at solstices because it's like this pendulum, right? And then it gets longer. And it's a thing I love to remind people, like this is, if you know your astrology symbolism, this is the Gemini glyph, right? Which is 2 vertical lines. So you can either do that, like I learned this in Seattle where I lived, and I can't say I learned this, but came to this philosophy or theory in Seattle where I was sitting in a park and there's this really beautiful totem pole there. And I just happened to be sitting like due north of that totem pole, and it was midday, and the shadow of the totem pole like hit me, right? Because I was on its meridian. And then I could see where the sun was, right, aligned. It like wasn't quite at like at the top of this particular totem pole, there's like a thunderbird, right? Or some would say like eagle, okay? And at the bottom, it's like a whale and like beaver. Do you know what I mean? And so like if I sat in that same position throughout the course of the year, at midday, I could see the sun on the pole, but I could see it kind of climbing up through these different animals, right? Wow. It's like a cool way to kind of keep solar time. Now,
that is
Holy shit.
That's mind blowing, because there's so many questions that leads to right there. I feel like I'm a Washingtonian. I grew up, I was born in Port Angeles, Washington. I went to college in Bellingham, you know, all around that area. Totem poles are a huge part of indigenous culture up there. And I have, you know, been working my way to trying to even get to researching that, you know. There's so many things, but it's so interesting that there's like archetypes tied into the culture as they like what is your understanding of totem poles, and did you dive a bit deeper in on that? Is that a thing to during the different times of the year that it's almost like a clock keeping mechanism, that a timekeeping mechanism that would almost portray different archetypes of those animals? Like the Thunderbird on top reminds me of the cross on top of the obelisk in St. Petersburg.
Totally. In St. Peter's Square, but there's probably one in St. Petersburg too. And there's these obelisks all over the place, and many of these obelisks actually had glyphs and writing up them so they could work in the same way. My understanding of totem poles as daily and yearly calendars is absolutely zero.
Okay.
And I've not spoken with any elder about this, which is where I would go. There's this great information from these ancient wisdom keepers has sadly been destroyed through genocide and forced underground in many ways by those who, like, literally, as we know, would be beaten for even speaking their own language. So, while I have studied academically, many of the star traditions of different tribes in the Americas, as we call them today, for example, there's a really wonderful book that I highly recommend by Ronald Goodman called Lakota Star Knowledge, which is a cool book to it attempts to preserve some of this ancient wisdom and to retrieve some of this ancient wisdom based upon maps that were found. Okay. But, and a lot of my own, becoming more natural was, because I've been honored to participate in some ceremonies and with many different indigenous traditions. So in the Lakota tradition, for example, in Nipi, right, which many will know as Sweat Lodge, as you come in, you put your head on the ground, okay, and you say, to all my relations, I'll speak in English. And then you always crawl into the lodge sunwise, which is what we used to call clockwise. Because if you live in the northern hemisphere, the sun moves clockwise through the sky every day, rising in the east, reaching in the south, and resting in the west. Okay, if you turn your back to the light, which is okay to do if you're willing to do some shadow work, right? You will also notice that your shadow, if you're in the northern hemisphere, and specifically north of Earth's Tropic of Cancer, okay, that your shadow every day also moves clockwise from the west to the north to the south. This is why clocks do this. And it's also why in Lodge, from what I was taught, you always crawl through sunwise, right? So, and if you're in that position, closest to the door, you crawl in last because the first person will come in and they'll go clockwise throughout the entire lodge and then get to the door on the other side. If you're the last one in, you're closest to the door, which can be nice when it gets really hot. But if you need to bail, you need to crawl all the way behind everyone else and move through the entire lodge. That is a very important part, at least in the ceremonies that I've been honored to participate in, of that ceremony. And you don't cross the line between the fire and the lodge, and the way that the lodge is aligned, the door will be facing one of the cardinal directions. I don't want to go too far there, right? And I hesitate to step into appropriation space, of course, right? And I've, again, been honored to receive some direct instruction from many traditions. In the Southern Hemisphere, a lot of my own learning has been at the result of teachings from Peru. They work with the directions in an opposite way because in the Southern Hemisphere, the sun moves counterclockwise through the sky, right? And let me leave that there for now. So where are we, right? So the meridian calendar and the Gemini glyph. Right. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so this is completely a theory based on totem poles. It would be interesting if in cultures that are keeping a 13 moon calendar, and I promise we're going to circle back to that or crescent back to that one, that will have different names for the wolf moon or whatever.
Mhm.
Like if you created a totem pole in such a way that if you sat in the right place every day, you could see the sun like climbing through those animals. Okay. Now it's tricky because, you know, especially at like summer solstice time, you need to be really close to that pole if you want to see the sun on it, right? It's a lot easier if you turn around and watch what the shadow does. And that's how meridian calendars have been employed. So the Gemini glyph on one level, you can see just by like I have here where I live, a tree, a beautiful pine tree. And there's a particular place where I can stand in my backyard where that pine tree is due south of me. So then when the shadow of the pine tree hits me, I know it's midday. Or I go out at night and it's the way that I can see the midheaven in the sky. And that's maybe getting too far into astrology or astronomy for us today. Okay. But like I can also watch the length of that pine tree shadow throughout the course of the year. Right. So when the sun sets, the shadow of my pine tree will hit the corner of the patio bricks. I know it's midday, and the length of that pine tree shadow will tell me where I am in the year. So I can like sit at my corner of my bricks and I can watch the sun climb that tree at midday from winter solstice to summer solstice when it peaks, right? And then come back down and see that's the Gemini glyph. It's like 6 months goes up, 6 months comes down, okay? Or if I'm looking at the shadow and doing the true shadow work, you know, like for 6 months, the shadow will get longer at midday from summer solstice, from the height of the light to winter solstice, right? And then the sun is reborn after the longest night. And then for 6 months, the shadow will get shorter and shorter and shorter until the sun again peaks, all right? Hard to describe these things, I think, without illustrations and animations, which is why I put so much time into creating illustrations and animations to teach these subjects. But also like when I teach astronomy, like, you know, natural astronomy, it's always to bring people outside, reclaim their natural experience of the sky, or more importantly, the marriage of heaven and earth. So while there will be like written quizzes and such, I'm much more interested in people's like field book, where I send them out with like assignments of, hey, go draw the moon at sunset. What shape is it? Wait some time. What stars come around? Like, you know, draw trees and mountain peaks that are there. Just a really simple drawing. Draw the shape of the moon and the stars that the moon is currently traveling with, and go check it out tomorrow.
That's a
and give me
fantastic
another
practice.
drawing. Oh, it's epic. And, you know, like you learn these things. And I have been outside so many times with people where I show them like one specific thing that I won't describe here. And I have seen people laugh maniacally. I have seen people break down sobbing, right? And, you know, you get to these things, it's like, why didn't I know that? It's like, no, you always knew that. And now you're just remembering. And that's why it is such a powerful emotional experience. I mean, you can just feel like the river of your ancestry kind of returning in your heart in those times, right? When we just reclaim a natural connection. It's as simple as like before you take the so-called smartphone out of your pocket to check the digital time with numbers and a colon, you know, like look to the sun. And look to your shadow, like literally look to your own shadow every day, throughout the year, and you will like return to a natural experience of Earth sun time. Now, I know this isn't the Mysteries of the Sun podcast, right? So
That's okay.
I appreciate you offering me a time to go solar. I want to say this other thing that I think is really interesting. Well, there's a few. So let's talk about sunrise versus sunreach versus sunrest versus sunroot, right? Like sometimes I like to compare these things to Beatles songs, right? So Here Comes the Sun is very much a story of the spring equinox, right? George tells us it's been a long, cold, dreary summer. George was born in February, the sun in the sign of Pisces, just like on the way to this spring equinox in Liverpool, where you have very long nights in the winter, you know. Again, that kind of spring equinox time, it's very much equivalent to sunrise. Like, here comes the sun, you know. Midday, There's a great Paul McCartney song, and Paul McCartney was born at midday at summer solstice.
Are they all four like different parts of the clock? That would be so crazy.
In the year expression, they are like John was born with the sun in Libra in autumn time. Ringo. No, that's not true. So George is born with the sun in Pisces. So like officially winter time, Northern Hemisphere winter, the last month of winter. And I'm talking tropical signs here, which is seasonal signs. Paul is born in like the last days of Gemini, right before the sun ingresses Cancer, when it shines directly above the Tropic of Cancer, which is as close as the sun can get to Liverpool, England, and therefore in that experience in Liverpool, the highest sun. And Paul was born at midday. So he's born at like the summer of the year and the summer of the day, if that makes sense. And then Ringo has the sun in Cancer. So, I mean, like officially Paul's born like the last days of spring, and Ringo, I don't know, it's the first week or two of summer. So you do get like winter, spring, summer.
That's that's pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. So Paul's got this song, right, which is like Good Day Sunshine. And, you know, burns my feet as they touch the ground. Right? It's a good day, sunshine. Like, which is just such a noon song and such like a summer solstice song, right? The sunset song that I often use is I'll Follow the Sun, right? Someday you'll look to see I've gone, but tomorrow will rain, so I'll follow the sun, which feels very sunset, feels especially very kind of autumnal equinox and going into the darkness. And then interestingly, like Sun King is the winter solstice song, right? It's so like from Abbey Road, you know, that song, and they're all like, everyone is happy. Everyone is laughing. It's like, you don't sound so happy, guys. And, you know, sometimes it's like that, like fake it till you make it, or you have that great feast at winter solstice time, right? I mean, there's a few reasons for that, by the way. So vegans and vegetarians, please plug your ears. You know, if there's not enough grain, if you're in like, you know, animal husbandry for the animals, all of the animals to make it through the winter. And so many of them would be sacrificed. And then you have all this meat for a feast, right? I mean, that's just like living naturally, right? In times before grocery store and all that. But it's also very important for us to have gratitude for life, right? So that we can make it through the dark times. And so all of these traditions around, you know, the evergreens and whatnot, and many different cultures had great feasts and great parties, like Saturnalia is a great example of that, like the ancient Roman celebration around winter solstice, right? But that time when, you know, the ancestors are said to be close, because there's a lot of death in the air, and a lot of people will not make it through. So the more that we can celebrate light in life when we are at the longest night and the darkest time, right, the more that we will be supported by the guidesses and the guides to make it through. And this has long been known, right? And so, and especially in the like northern reaches of, you know, modern day UK and Germany and Scandinavia and whatnot, the winter solstice was seen as the beginning of the year. And there are traditions, as I think we all know, that predate Christianity, where the sun and different solar figures were seen to be reborn at this winter solstice time. Like why January 1st? So we started with, you know, Happy New Year. And today is New Year from one perspective. And New Year was 21 days ago from another perspective. Or, you know, maybe it was 12 days before that or 7 days before that. I mean, the January 1st, it's so weird astrologically, right? Because there's a lot of astrological techniques where we will kind of look to a year chart to predict like what might happen like geopolitically so mundane astrology is a branch of astrology that kind of specializes there. And most astrologers and actually most astronomers look at the sun's Aries ingress as the beginning of the astrological year. Some use, by the way, only northern hemispheric cosmology to defend that idea, right? Which is that this is the resurrection, right? Because it's when the sunlight overcomes the night. Yes, the sun is reborn from the longest night at Christmas time. I mean, more officially at December solstice, right? Capricorn solstice. Or I should say winter solstice to speak more globally, right? It's your longest night and then the sun is reborn. But the resurrection would be spring equinox because now light overcomes night. So many will say that's why the calendar or the astrological year begins with the sun's Aries ingress. But that's like a very northern hemispheric statement, of course, because the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere is the autumn equinox in the southern hemisphere, yes? There's a reason for this. Like one of the things all of my students, I'm hoping really integrate, like one of the things that I'm trying to return the astrological attention to is the truth that the tropical zodiac is completely directionally aligned. That like so many systems of ancient wisdom traditions, it is about an expression of the cardinal directions. And north is north everywhere on Earth. Okay, so the North Pole of the Earth points to the sun when the sun ingresses Cancer. Right? It literally at that time, the sun will shine directly above Earth's Tropic of Cancer. Like the people who attack the tropical zodiac and call it not astronomical obviously don't know that. Right? It's so absurd. And it's because the signs and the constellations don't align. And with all the 13 in Gator, I want to get back to that because it's a really cool thing you said about Gregory the 13th and this 13-day displacement between Gregorian and Julian at this time. And 13 is a cool moon number, okay? Mm-hmm. But, you know, we should also talk about this like idea of like there being 13 signs and not 12. And I'll even talk about like 12 as like a number of gold and 13 is a number of silver. We'll get back to that, okay?
Yeah.
But really importantly, like north, not magnet north, but true north, which is like Earth's North Pole or rotational axis, okay? It only in Earth's orbital motion or annual revolution about the sun, the North Pole is leaning towards the sun at solstice, right? And the sun, when we say this in tropical astrology, that's the sun's ingress into this tropical sign of Cancer. At the time, it's shining directly above Earth's Tropic of Cancer. And of course, that's closest to Liverpool and to Mendocino and Richmond and Calgary. You know, that's like northern hemisphere summer solstice. But of course, that's as far as the sun can get from the southern hemisphere. So they're winter solstice. Either way, I can call it north solstice. Okay. So the Earth has a very clear North Pole and South Pole. East and west on the Earth is much trickier because like east in New York is a different scene than east in LA, right? However, from the center of the Earth, and that's where we measure astrology from. It's truly as above, so below. Like we are measuring astrology not from the surface of the Earth where we live and breathe and witness the heavenly happenings. And I should say we are measuring the placement of the planets in the signs, okay? Not from the surface of the Earth, but from the center of the Earth where we are all connected, right? And because Earth has a north and a south, like a global north and south, undeniable, that's her rotational axis, she has a global east and west. And when the sun is due east of Earth's center, that's the sun moving into zero Aries, right? That's northern hemisphere, spring equinox, southern hemisphere, autumn equinox. But either way, it's the sun due east of Earth's center. And all you have to do to be reminded that the east is the direction of new beginnings is to sleep outside for a night and remember your gratitude when the sun rises in the east, okay? So we can see, I think, a global idea in this solar time of the solar year, why that eastern sun could speak for the beginning of the year, right? But that's like if you believe days begin at sunrise. Like you don't have to align your day cosmology and your year cosmology, but you should. And we all accidentally signed up for a structure that does, where at least if you're in the northern hemisphere, we're beginning our years in the middle of the darkness or like the darkest night, right? Basically. I mean, we should align to winter solstice. I'm going to get back to that too. And we begin our days in the middle of the night or something close to 12 a.m., right? Which is not true midnight. So we're like kind of aligned to this birthing of the sun as the beginning of the day. And from the Northern Hemisphere perspective, it's the beginning of the year. Okay, so let me talk about the middle of the night, which again, it's the hardest thing to actually experience. Like we can experience sunrise by just going out there and watching the sunrise, clouds allowing. We can experience sunset by going out there and watching the sunset, clouds allowing, right? Midday, shortest shadow of the day. Midnight, how do you get to that one? I gotta say, I was like a really proud teacher. I did a retreat in Sedona earlier this year. And one student who will not agree with me that she answers all the questions most quickly, but she's like really tuned in. She was like, oh my God, I just felt it. And I was like, yeah, me too. So in the middle of the night, and I'm out there taking pictures of the stars, sometimes super late night or just drinking starlight and like vibing, you can feel it in your bones when it moves from cold to really fucking cold. That is the sun rooting. And it moves from a temperament perspective, like in the tradition, from cold and dry, which is like the autumn, to cold and wet, which is like the winter. And you can, in that moment, feel it in your bones. And for those of you who follow astrology, cast a chart for that moment that you feel this in the middle of the night, and you will find the sun at the IC, the Imonchele, the bottom of the heavens, like the sun rooting. The sun has now stopped going down beneath the ground and it's on the way up, right? So there is something beautiful again about like beginning your day when the sun begins his daily climb. But we don't have evidence of this until sunrise, yes? Or maybe before, when the light comes and the birds start screaming and about the party that's about to happen and all that, right? There's something beautiful about beginning your year with the birth of the sun after the longest night. And the further north of the equator you are, the more that kind of December solstice or Capricorn solstice, right? They solstice, because that's when the Earth's southern axis is leaning towards the sun, right? That's a global moment. Like it makes sense to begin your year then, because you're going through this trial, right? Interestingly, in astrology, if we think of the Northern Hemisphere experience, the signs of Capricorn and Aquarius have long been associated with Saturn. And it's this trial through the darkness and through the cold, where time is a little bit more relevant. Like if you don't make it back to the cave by sunset, you probably ain't coming back. That's not as true in the summertime, right? So, and I think, speaking of it that way too, it reminds us of the challenge for us to reconnect to natural time, because we don't have to. Because most of us listening to this right now, and we should always remember to be grateful for this, can go push a button and a light comes on, or turn a thing and the water gets hot. You know what I mean? Like it's a very, like I can push a bunch of buttons on this like piece of glass over here and groceries get delivered to my doorstep. Like, it's a very different thing than honoring the seasons. And I mean, Kayleigh's in Calgary, so she's much more able to access this truth. But when we get to the moon, we forget that, the moonlight is different at full moon time than new moon time, because usually we're out walking in street lights. I have this experience many times where I like walk the dog at night sometimes, and we get to this park where the street lights don't touch. And suddenly it's like you're in the silver light of the moon. It's like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. See, it used to be a lot safer to travel at full moon time or thereabouts, because you can actually see the potholes in the ground and the robbers on the road or potential predators or whatever it may be. And we've kind of lost that idea that at new moon time, it's good to like be inside, like energetically, spiritually, but also physically, right? And kind of shut down, because these are these dark nights are wonderful for stargazing, but this is the time where it's like less safe every month. So I've just been on this like long monologue here. I apologize. There's one other thing I want to finish up, and then we'll go back. So let's just talk about the solar time in the day and the year and kind of finish that up so we can get to silver time and lunar time. Okay. So the golden day, as I will call it, is either midnight, like true midnight to midnight. Again, the hardest one to measure, though you can feel it in your bones. And philosophically, it's interesting to begin the day when the sun begins his climb from hell, from the bottom of the heavens. Or we could go sunrise to sunrise. I mean, that one seems to make the most sense, right? The kind of most precise measurement is that shortest shadow of the day. And once you draw that line, then every day when the sun reaches its height, the shadow is pointing on that line. It's like you put the stick in the ground, you find the shortest shadow one day, and you draw a line in that direction. So like at St. Peter's Square, this beautiful long brass line, and you can just watch the midday shadow go longer into the winter and then shorter into the summer. 6 months longer, 6 months shorter. But when the sun hits that line, it is midday. So midday to midday is like actually kind of the most precise, natural way to observe the solar day, right? The Earth's rotation with respect to the sun. I should just say Earth's rotation with respect to the other stars, which is called the sidereal day, is about 4 minutes shorter. And I don't think we want to go there. Now, like, let's stick with the Earth and the moon and the sun. The stars bring in a whole nother thing. Okay. You could do a day from sunset to sunset. And the most intriguing thing is many, many, many cultures do. Why? Okay. And the answer is the moon. Okay. Because it would seem kind of ridiculous to begin your days at sunset, right? Like isn't that the end of the day?
I lived in Portland for a long time, and I feel like it's a large part of people happening on a subconscious level in Portland, Oregon.
I visited South America once, Argentina and Paraguay. And while we were in Paraguay, all of the activities happened once it started getting once it started getting dark, because it was so fucking hot during the daytime. You didn't go to church or do anything until it was night, and then everything started happening. So.
Yeah, that's like siesta, right? Like in Spain, like good luck getting some toothpaste at 1 p.m. or what, like the shops close because, before AC especially, like it was just too damn hot in some seasons of the year. You got to shut it down. And then, in Spain, like they're going out to dinner at like 10 p.m. It's like, wait, what? It's just like a whole different thing. It's intriguing. And, they're going to celebrate January 6th much more than they do December 25th with Tres Reyes or Three Kings or the idea of the Epiphany. Yeah, so one thing I actually wanted to just finish up too is like, why January 1st? Right? Because like if I want to cast a chart for the Earth and speak about the year ahead. So some traditions, like there's a astrological kind of recent astrological tradition called Uranian astrology and cosmobiology. They both came out of Germany, and they use the sun entering Capricorn, in other words, northern hemisphere winter solstice, as kind of the chart of the year. And again, like the further north you are of the equator, the more that, winter solstice time is going to be quite significant in that birth of the light, because there's a lot of darkness, right? If you're in Hawaii, it's like whatever. We should get to Hawaii because they're doing a very different thing that will help us tie together the sun and the stars and the moon, actually, right? But most astrologers are using the sun's Aries ingress. And again, for me, globally, that's because the sun is due east of Earth's center. That's like using days from sunrise to sunrise, right, as the chart of the year. Now, in mundane astrology, it depends on what the rising sign is in a particular place. Like if I wanted to look at the geopolitics for the United States, I might look at that sun Aries ingress or the northern hemisphere spring equinox moment cast for DC, the capital of this country, and get an idea of what's going to go down in this country for the year. But depending on what sign is rising on the eastern horizon at the time, the chart's either said to be good for 3 months or 6 months or for the entire year. And we're not going to get into mundane astrology beyond that, right? But this idea of when does the year begin? And January 6th is kind of ridiculous. Yeah, I just read from a friend I really respect this idea that in our time, like there is a Sun, Earth, Sirius, like Sothis, the brightest star in the sky alignment, which is intriguing, but that's not going to happen for much longer before this time. Roman, there might be something in this kind of like 13 synchronicity that you brought in earlier, like with that too, that's intriguing. But you know, why January 1st? There's another thing astronomically, which is orbits are not circular, they are elliptical. So while we often teach that Earth is 93 million miles away from the sun, sorry, Kayleigh, I can't remember exactly how many kilometers that is, but it's not true every day. The sun is closest to Earth, or Earth is closest to the sun in January, and we're furthest away in July. So that will change over time too, but it is interesting in our day and age that like a lot of people are aligning to this January 1st, right? New year. And it's around the time that the Earth is closest to the sun and therefore moving fastest in our orbit, or in our earthly experience, sun is closest to us, like literally a little bit bigger in the sky that's hard to see without going blind, and moving fastest through those particular signs. So the sun gets through the signs of Sagittarius and Capricorn much more quickly than it gets through the tropical signs of Gemini and Cancer, because Earth is closest to the sun in this kind of January zone, okay? And that's why, as I was saying before, if you just divide the year of 365 in about a quarter days by 12, you get this 30.44 days is the average amount of time it takes the sun to move through a sign, which is an equal division of space on the ecliptic. That's the path of the sun in our sky, because it's the plane of Earth's orbit. And I know that's a lot of astronomy. But if you were going to do this 30-31, then actually when Earth is closest to the sun, that's when we should do these 30-day months, because the sun is moving fastest, right? And so it's getting through those signs much more quickly than in the summertime. Now, you do get, interestingly, like July and August each have 31 back to back, and we've learned that's because of Julius and Augustus, right? And that's true. But they, you know, these cats were attempting, I think, to celebrate like Sunts, which I'll just describe as a 12th of the year. And for we who are following astrology, that's just the sun moving from, you know, Aries to Taurus, and Taurus to Gemini, and Gemini to Cancer, right? That is a way to return to natural solar time. Just follow the sun through the signs, okay? How you see that in the sky, that's a whole different thing. And you need Earth for this. And actually that shadow calendar, the meridian calendar at the Vatican, is one of the great ones. So let's talk about, and I think this is the last kind of unfinished bit that I have before we can go to the moon or wherever you want to go in between. The Julian and Gregorian thing, right? Why didn't the Julian calendar work? What predated the Julian calendar is another fascinating study, but we'll leave that for the Sun podcast. Not enough sun for the Moon podcast today, right? But the Julian calendar was employing a system, which I think most people believe the Gregorian calendar does, which is a year of 365 and a quarter days. Okay, so let me speak decimals. Everyone get ready for your math. 365.25 days. Are we good? Yep. And so the way that you deal with that, or the way that the Julian calendar dealt with that, is that you throw in a leap day every 4th year.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So because every year you have an extra quarter spin, right? So the Earth, right? What is the year? What is a day? 365 years. What is that? That's the Earth is spinning 365 times with respect to the sun. Let's call that sunrise to sunrise as we orbit the Earth. But it's 365 and a quarter. So basically, you know, you're a quarter day, quote unquote, off Every year you have this extra quarter day, an extra quarter spin. And the way that you make sure that your calendar stays true to the solstices or the equinoxes is you just throw in a leap year every fourth year, right? Every year you're kind of accumulating an extra quarter day, half a day after 2 years, 3/4 days after 3 years, a full day after 4 years. So you threw in a leap day and then it resynchronizes, right?
Right.
Well, the issue is the year is actually more like 365.2422 days.
Of course it is.
Okay, and this is the solar year. There's also a sidereal year, which is the sun with the stars, not the sun with our star. The Earth with the stars instead of the Earth with the sun, and that's not our place today either. But this is 365.242199 and change. Okay, like the solar year, and there's interesting hiccups, and it changes from year to year. But I think a good number for folks to remember is 365.242, or maybe even 0.2422. Okay. And so it's not 365.25. Now, when you start throwing points around like this and talking numbers, like heads can spin, and we've been talking for some time. So I feel like we should all take a breath and just like relax into that one a little bit. And, interestingly, they were doing this back in the day without decimals. Like working with that as a fraction, like that's tricky to get to. Okay. So because of this difference in the Julian calendar idea of what a year is, 365.25 days or 365.25 days, and what the solar year actually is of like 365.2422, over centuries, that difference starts adding up. And what happened is that Easter was slipping from the equinox. Okay, like there are many other reasons astronomically that I can show you the mythical astro-magical mystery of the sun on the cross at Passover time, right? And why that transmission, and even like the painting the ram's bloods on the doors from the Torah or the Bible, and then Christ being crucified at Passover time, and Easter being the sun on the cross. Like this is all astronomy. I don't mean to offend when I say that, but it is quite true, and I think I'm in good company to say whatever the heck we need to here, right? But anyway, there's like it's just too long. But that's one thing I love to show people is like these are astronomical transmissions. Whether or not the sun could actually embody on Earth and, all these things, like, I don't doubt it. And I think that gets a little bit too deep into my own cosmology than necessary right now. But, it was an issue for the church that Easter started slipping from equinox. And you had these folks like, dude, Adam just like recorded Monday wrong. It's like, what? It's like fucking nothing to do with anything, right? And then they had to dust off the old astrology books, and they started building things like this meridian calendar at St. Peter's Square, or these rose lines that you find in Catholic churches all around the world. They're amazing, like astrology calendars, sun through the signs calendars, right? And then we kind of remembered that the year is not 365.25. We also had broken out of Roman numerals at that time, and like the decimal came around, making this a little bit easier to approach through like modern mathematics, like with the 0 and the decimal point and those things, And I'll just say like what the Gregorian calendar does is we don't actually have a leap day every 4 years. Right, that's like our experience of it, and it will be in your whole lifetime, okay? But it won't be for some of our children. No, like children's children, okay? So this is the way it works now. Every fourth year, you throw in a leap day, and specifically, in the Olympics used to work this way, but I don't know after the craziness if they'll get back to the cycle or not. It's a year that's divisible by 4. Okay, so we just turned 2023, not divisible by 4, not a leap year, but 2024 is divisible by 4. And so we will have February 29th in the calendar year of 2024 because 2024 is divisible by 4. Next one will be 2028 and 2032 and 2036. And any time a year is divisible 4, unless it is also divisible by 100. Okay. So, because if it's divisible by 4, if you just throw in a leap day every 4th year, you get that 365.25, which is what the Julian thing was doing, but that didn't keep the pace. Okay. And so by not doing leap years when it's divisible also by 100, right? So basically you're skipping every 25th leap day. That one gets you down to 365.24, I believe. Okay. So then that's too low because it's actually 365.2422. So there's another trick, which is divisible by 4 is a leap year unless also divisible by 100. So 2100 will not be a leap year unless it's also divisible by 400. Then it is a leap year. Okay, so 2000 was like 2000 divisible by 4, leap year. Divisible by 100, not a leap year. Divisible by 400 is a leap year. And that math gets you to 365.245, I believe. Okay, now you're really close to 365.242. Okay, and then you have to do this other thing that I'm not intelligent enough to know, or learned enough to know, I think I should say. But it's like, I think every couple or few thousand years, there's a tweak where your 400 year is a leap day or something, and that makes it all good. So the Gregorian system of like keeping the year aligned to the solstices and equinoxes, like it's really good. Like the way that they're doing like the decimal math, it totally works. Okay. Again, it doesn't feel so natural because we're shifting from 31 to 30. There's something in it because the sun's average time through one of the 12 signs in its yearly course is 30.44 days there between 30 and 31. So there's something to it. The February 28 might be a throwback to lunar calendars. Kind of, although 29 would be closer, and we'll get to that, okay, as we go and play with silver next. The long anticipated journey with the moon here on the Moon podcast, coming to you very soon. But the last thing I want to say is like, why January 1st? Because it's not a global moment. Like if I choose to cast midnight or clock civil time 12 a.m. in Greenwich, where the prime meridian was voted to be by the empire like not too long ago, and call that like New Year for the world. Well, there's so many places, like all of Asia had midnight on January 1st well before then. You know what I mean? It's like where I'm going to get it in California, it's pretty late in the game. Like Hawaii is a couple hours back behind me, but then you get to the date line, you know, where they're having like New Year's 1st. If you do this January 1st thing, it's not an astronomical moment. And there's this kind of fun thing that's just rearing its head on the internet from my witness right now of like Sun, Earth, Sirius, but that's not it either. Like that's not going to last for long, and it's not really visible in all places on Earth. And that's just too much to go into. Okay. Why not work with the alignment of Gaia's spine, the sword of our stone, the world tree, Earth's rotational axis, which defines the cardinal directions. And when that axis aligns to the sun, which is a global moment, it might happen in New York at midday when it's happening at sunrise in the West Coast or something. Okay. So it's not like everybody's having the same like energetic experience of that moment. But when we look at the sun moving into tropical Capricorn, for example, that's an expression of global time. And it's all about the southern side of Earth's spine, our rotational axis, leaning in that moment towards the sun, and only in that moment. And that won't happen again for another 365.2422 spins. Okay. So if we decided at least, if we want to have a calendar that keeps solar time and lunar time, okay? Or let's say golden time and silver time. And look, I'm all about the moon. I'm all about the silver time. I promise you we're going to get there. And, planting its seeds at new moon can be a great thing or whatever. But if you don't also honor the timings of the earth and the sun, and you like things like food because it tastes good, but also you like life, you better keep golden time or you will die. Do you know what I mean? So like whether you're an agricultural society and you need to time your planting and harvesting, or you're a nomadic society and you need to know when the berries are on the bush over that hill or the herd's going to be over that way, or, like you need to keep earth sun time. And the moon will help you do this for sure. But like the seasons are not an expression, like the moon's not in that equation. It's just earth and sun. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what are the phases of the moon if you're not also taking into context the relationship of the moon with the sun? Right. So
say more, Kayleigh.
Yeah. Well, what is a full moon but the reflection of the sunlight, right?
Beautiful.
What is a quarter moon but half of the reflection of the sunlight, right? You don't get moon phases without it reflecting the sun. So you have to take into account where the sun is and where the moon is in relationship to the sun.
Beautiful. So, I mean, let's bring in some myths here. I read this like academic article some time ago, which was showing how many global myths there are about eclipses that involve dragons, like Bacanawa eating the 7 moons in the Filipina tradition, or Rahu eating the sun in the Indian tradition. I mean, many, many cultures. And this is a very beautiful expression of the sun, moon, earth dynamic. But this article is like, and there's none in the West. It's like, okay, let me tell you a little story. Right? So Latona, to use the Latin, or Leto to use the Greek, was pregnant with Jupiter, or Zeus's child. And his new wife, all right, so let's go Latin, all right? So this is, Latona is pregnant with Jupiter's child, and Jupiter had just recently married his sister Juno, his third wife. And Juno was not so happy that Latona was carrying his child. And so she, in her fury, so say the myths, sent this serpent after Latona to chase her away from the comfort and the safety of a midwife, so that she could not deliver this child that she did not want to exist. And this serpent was called Python. It's the serpent from the Oracle of Delphi. And so Python's chasing the pregnant Latona, and she's on the run. And fortunately, she received some guidance from on high, and she found a safe place to give birth to this child. It was actually the first of 2 children, and she was called Diana, who you may know as a goddess of the moon, a goddess of the moon, I like to say. The moon, we know in astrology, responsible for many beautiful energies and realities, including fertility and midwifery, right? And Diana's first gig as a midwife was to deliver her brother Apollo, right? A guide of the sun. So Latona was actually pregnant with twins, these who would long be associated with the moon and the sun. The moon was born first, Diana, and then she delivered Apollo's birth on Earth, just as the moon delivers sunlight to earthly eyes. So many of these ancient myths carry these beautiful and poetic transmissions of astronomical and other awareness, okay? Now, later in life, Apollo and Diana, who were both known as great archers, okay, caught up to Python and put an arrow through his face. And actually, ever since the oracle at Delphi, some call it Delphi, is Apollo's oracle. just like weird that it would be a solar oracle, because if you know anything about its traditions, there's all this like serpent symbolism and like gases in the night and like inner vision, and it's like much more of like a lunar kind of place than a solar thing, right? But the deal is like its old host Python was sent after his mama, and he sought revenge, and Apollo's bow and arrow was strung that pierced that serpent in the head. Okay, so the serpent's head to all astrologers will be familiar, because this is what we call the north node of the moon. What are the nodes of the moon? So this is important if we want to talk about the draconic month. It's not necessary to our kind of taming the rhythms of silver and gold and calendar kung fu conversation. But I think I should say, because we certainly want to speak about Diana's bow, we might as well speak about Apollo's bow as well. So when do you ever see Apollo's bow? If Apollo is a guide of the sun, when does the sun ever look like that bow that I see shining behind Kayleigh's head on my screen?
On solar eclipse days.
And only at solar eclipse, right?
Yeah.
And solar eclipses, we know, are a very special kind of new moon. Right, as we were describing before, new moons are typically no moons. You can't see her. She is gone. She, as we like to say in astrology, is under the beams of the sun. She is so close to the light that we are blind to her reflection, which is awesome, right? Like, we know astronomically, at least in the modern astronomical physical thought, this is moon between Earth and sun, right? And so the mirror of the moon is always facing the sun. And at that time, she is reflecting the sun away from the Earth. So we're looking at a face of the moon that's in darkness at the time, and we don't see the moon, okay? And typically, a new moon or a synod, again, meaning meeting of moon and sun, or a conjunction, will actually be, from your local experience on Earth, though you can't see it, the moon either above the sun in the sky or below the sun in the sky. Right. So actually, if it's above the sun in the northern hemisphere, it's below the sun in the southern hemisphere. It's more intricate than that, but I'm just going to leave that there. Okay. So every about 6 months, when the sun is either at the north node, the dragon's head, we say, or the south node of the moon, the dragon's tail, then we have eclipse seasons. Because the nodes are, from Earth's point of view, where the paths of the sun and the moon intersect. The moon's path, right? So this is not like the true model, like the moon orbiting the Earth as the Earth orbits the sun, right? It's the one we are taught in school. It's like a decent model to use to teach, but truly, like, the moon and the Earth are kind of engaged in this duet dance about the sun together, and it's much more spiral and beautiful than the models we use. But here we're going to use this moon orbiting the Earth every month as the Earth orbits the sun every year. Okay. And the moon's orbit of the Earth is not on the same plane as the Earth's orbit of the sun. Earth about the sun is called the ecliptic, right? So as the Earth dances about the sun every year, that's all plane. If we extend that plane towards infinity, it's embraced by the constellations of the zodiac. This is what makes the zodiacal constellations special. It's what separates the ram and the bull and the twins and the crab from Hercules and Lyra and other things out there, okay? Because they embrace the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship. So from Earth's point of view, though we can't see ever the stars that the sun is currently traveling through, because you will go blind trying, the sun is always hosted in his annual orbit about us from our point of view by these 12 constellations of the zodiac. Okay, that's what makes them special. And that's the ecliptic plane, simply the plane that the Earth describes as it orbits the sun every year, or from our point of view, the path that the sun takes through our sky as it quote unquote orbits the Earth every year, right? Now, the moon's path separates from that path of the sun by about 5 degrees, a little bit more. every month, the moon snakes above and below the plane of the sun, or the ecliptic, which really is like the plane of our solar system. Our solar system is relatively flat. All the planets have their own orbital paths. Therefore, all the planets have their own nodes, which is where their path crosses the path of the sun, or the Earth sun, the ecliptic. But let's stick with silver and gold. So the moon every month snakes above and below the path of the sun. In the northern hemisphere experience, the moon, when she crosses the northern intersection of her path in the ecliptic, right? That's the north node. We used to call it the ascending node, I think, until the astronomers went to the southern hemisphere and like, wait a second, down there, that's the descending node, because north is down and south is up, and that goes too far. I can rectify that from a global perspective too, but that's for another time, okay? But let's just say for now, like every month, and this is called the draconic month, like moon at north node back to the north node, it's about 27 and a half days long, the draconic month, because the nodes move retrograde through space. So it's shorter than the other ones, because there are many, many months, okay? We're gonna tackle a few of them. The moon snakes above and below the path of the sun. Now, that means that if the sun is at one of the nodes, and this happens about every 6 months, the draconic year is like 350 some days long. If the sun is at the north node, like currently the north node is in the tropical sign of Taurus, and the sun will be at the node and close enough actually that the late Aries new moon in April will be a solar eclipse, because if the sun is at a node, then when the moon comes between Earth and sun, it's not above or below the sun's path, but on the sun's path from our point of view, and then you get shadow play, right? And that's Apollo's bow, right? The sun seemed to go through these phases. The crescent sun, the bow of the sun, the bow of Apollo, and the arrow is a line that we can draw through the heart of the earth, through the paths of the moon and the sun, which intersect at these nodes, these crossing points, right? And then the dragon, and why we see dragons and serpent symbolism with these nodes, with these eclipses, again, is because every month the moon snakes above and below the path of the sun, right? So we've long had these transmissions from the ancients from around the world of dragons and serpents, and the moon and the sun's story. And this one, I feel, is actually the most beautiful or the most detailed. And so these academic papers, I've read many now, of like, oh, the West didn't have any serpent eclipse transmission. It's like, dude, like, learn how to read, son, right? Because this like dragon chasing Latona, who gives birth to Diana, who some say 9 days and 9 nights later delivers Apollo. And there's an important truth there, because in 9 days there's 108 hours, and 9 nights 108 hours. Or wait, maybe it's 108 combined. Anyway, the 54, the 108, the number of the beads on the rosary and the mala, like the 108 names of the divine. We can go on and on. That's all sun, moon, earth stuff too, because, well, I just finished that. The moon is about 108 moon diameters from the earth. She actually averages 111, but she changes because she gets closer and further from Earth in her elliptical orbit. The sun is 108 Earths away from the Earth. And the sun is 108 suns away from the Earth. And the sun is 108 Earths in diameter. So this 108 is one of these kind of skeleton keys that unlocks like the sun, moon, and the Earth system. I'm going to say that again. It's good to see some images of this, but it's hard to do it to scale anyway. Let me actually do another piece. The radius of the moon is 1080. Okay, so 1080 miles. This makes the diameter of the moon 2,160 miles. And there's 2,160 years in an astrological age. Okay, so how the hell did that happen? That's weird. Okay, so, and you know, which metal is the moon associated with, friends?
Silver.
Okay, the atomic weight is 108. Mm-hmm. The radius of the moon is 1080 miles.
There's something else too with the 108 in like theosophical terms, or there's more associations that have to do with like either 18 or 108 that like absolutely
Endless.
associate with the moon. That's crazy. Yeah, I did not put those together yet.
Yeah, endless. And other numbers we should talk about. I don't know, this is probably going to turn into like a double episode here. But 18 and 19 are also really powerful moon and sun numbers for reasons I'll describe, right? So we'll look at 12 and 13 and 18 and 19.
It's gonna end up being a paid episode. Okay. I'm gonna have to...
Right on. Well, you know my post office box.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, don't have one, but trying to get off the grid, friends. So let's see. Where were we? Dragons. Oh, 108. 108 square feet of grass necessary for your chicken to be deemed free range. 108 double stitches on a baseball. And there's much more interesting metaphysical numbers, but those are some interesting modern expressions of the power of 108. The 9 days and 9 nights. Yeah, because what is 12? 12 times 9 is 108. So that's actually 108 like day hours, 108 night hours. And that gets you 216. The diameter of the moon is 2,160 miles. Take that number times 108, and you get the distance of the moon from the Earth, which changes, but that's like 98% accurate. The moon's actually, the average distance of the moon from the Earth is 111 moon diameters, which is also fun, the 111 or the 3, especially when we're talking about sun, moon, and Earth, the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world, to quote from the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. Okay, so the Earth now, if we take the diameter of the Earth and you multiply that by 108, you get the diameter of the sun. The diameter of the sun is 864,000 miles. Jupiter's diameter is 1/10 of that, 86,400 miles. There are 86,400 seconds in a day. And then the sun, whose diameter is 864,000 miles, multiply that by 108, and you get the average distance of the Earth to the sun, the 93 million miles, 99% accurate. So what is it with this amazing key 108? You know, another fun one that I'll share is 400. That's the one the astronomers will often teach. Why does the moon appear to be the same size in our sky as the sun? You know, you can go ask the Flat Earth crew for their answer. The one that astronomy now believes to be true, and I'm down, is that while the sun is 400 times larger than the moon by diameter, it's also 400 times further away.
That makes sense.
Right. So we get something close to us and it seems a lot bigger than it is, and objects in the mirror might be further than they appear, and right? So because the moon is 1/400th the size of the sun by a diameter, but 400 times closer, they both appear to be the same size in our sky, which is about half a degree of arc, where the circle of the sky is 360 degrees, right? So now this isn't always true. So you can have like a total solar eclipse alignment. You can have Earth, moon, and sun, and the moon and the sun are right at the node, either the north node or the south node, which are these crossing points of the moon orbit and the sun orbit from Earth's point of view. You can get the full-on Apollo's arrow lining through the heart of the moon and the heart of the sun, and still you don't get a total solar eclipse, but rather you'll get the ring of fire, or the annular solar eclipse. And the reason why is, just as it is true that Earth's orbit of the sun is not a circle but an ellipse, all astronomical orbits are ellipses. So we're closer to the sun in January and further in July. The sun literally, it's hard to see, but appears bigger in our sky in January and smaller in July when we're further away. Every month, and this is a different kind of month called the animalistic month, the moon gets closest to the Earth and then also furthest away. So if you're in one of these times where the moon's not particularly close to the Earth in her animalistic month, and she aligns to the sun, and it's all the eclipse parameters are there, but she's just not as large in our sky because she's further away in her own orbital thing, and so we get the ring of fire.
Where on the Earth, like actual physical, like geological location, is there a place where the moon actually gets closer? Would that be the North Pole, or would it be the actual equator
Yeah,
area?
that's a really cool. I'm with you in your vision space right now. I like it. It depends on where the moon is. So this is where it's really helpful to start learning some astrology.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't say this exactly for the moon, okay? But for the sun, we can very clearly say this, that when the sun ingresses Cancer, it's shining directly above the Tropic of Cancer. That ecliptic plane I was describing before of Earth's orbit about the sun, it passes through Earth's tropics. Okay,
Yeah.
and these are the bounds of the sun. Like when the northern axis of the Earth is leaning towards the sun, that's the sun ingressing tropical Cancer. It shines directly above tropical Cancer. And at that time, now the Earth is going to start going south for 6 months until it ingresses tropical Capricorn and shines directly above the Tropic of Capricorn, right? So the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, which are like 23.5-ish degrees north and south of Earth's equator, are the bounds of the sun. This is why the tropical zodiac is called the tropical zodiac. Tropikos is Greek for turnaround. And every 6 months, the sun will reach its southern extreme. That's 0 Capricorn in the tropical zodiac. Start moving north for 6 months, get to its northern extreme. There's ways that we experience that on the horizon. Actually, really fun. Other podcasts would be to talk about the solstices and the lunar standstill. Okay. We're actually coming into that time now. So if the moon is in Cancer, it is, it's closest to the Tropic of Cancer. Because the moon's path can get 5 degrees north of the sun's path and 5 degrees south of the sun's path, it very much depends where the lunar nodes are in the zodiac. But let's say you had like a lunar eclipse, or let's say you had a solar eclipse at 0 Cancer. We had one shortly before some planes flew into towers some years ago, for example. Or we had one while folks were locked up in their homes recently, for example. In the year of 2020, we had a summer solstice solar eclipse. Okay, so at that time, it is a solar eclipse because the sun and the moon are meeting at a node, right? It's solstice because the sun's coming to the alignment with Earth's spine. Okay, so the review of so many things we've talked about so far. And so like the Earth, Moon, Sun system are all aligned. And so at that time, when we had the solar eclipse at 0 Cancer-ish, then it was also at Earth's Tropic of Cancer. It will never get up to the poles. The moon, again, can get 5 degrees north or south of the sun's path. The sun's path is literally confined by Earth's tropics. There is a time every 18 and a half years, 18.6 years to be more specific, where we get to what are called lunar maxima. And at that time, like a Cancer moon can be 5 degrees north of the Tropic of Cancer. It's why I actually believe the quote unquote spaceship Earth, which is the silver Bucky Dome, Buckminster Fuller Dome at what's it called? Epcot Center at Disney World. I believe it's actually like a ritualistic moon temple because it's 28.5 degrees north of Earth's equator. And every 18.5 years, the Cancer moon can actually get just that far north and be directly overhead that like silver dome at Epcot Center. Which is actually
that is beautiful. That is beautiful. I mean, there's so much lore you could go into that because Buckminster Fuller was a next level amazing architect, physician. He was amazing, Buckminster Fuller, and he's one of the top tier guys to dig into when you want to get into ley lines and magnetics and things like that. So I love that you brought that up. That's super interesting, actually, to look at it like that. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if he personally, I love Bucky. Bucky's such an imperative teacher for us and he's like, it's hard to like learn the Buckies. It's just so amazingly advanced. That guy was like a prophet. So, and I don't know if he was in any way involved with the dome at Epcot Center. It is like his geometry, like the Bucky Dome, and they named it Spaceship Earth because that was a huge part of his own philosophy, right? That we're all on one spaceship called Earth, and we're all brothers and sisters, and we need to think of Earth first in this. Yeah. But I don't know if he was actually involved with its like placement. Yeah. Walt Disney was the 33rd degree Freemason. And I don't know how much like that's working in that crew. I'm told there's actually a Club 33 at Disneyland.
Well, Disneyland is literally on the 30th. LA is on the 33rd degree parallel, and apparently, I went deep down that rabbit hole. And looking into the actual laying down the groundworks and the blueprints of Disneyland, they were well aware that it was on a ley line, because he said that the gates were to be where the ley line passes, and the carousel in the middle of it was supposed to catch the energy and then spin the carousel, and then it creates like a toroid of happy energy, of earthen energy, there. And some people will even go to speculate that that's how they were getting a lot of their energy to power a lot of these rides back then. And
dope.
But I was like, it's fully so the Disney World.
Like you've gone into the beautiful side of those potential conspiracies, and this is one reason why I said, like, one thing that I'm really interested in. I don't think it's mandatory for astrologers to know why the zodiac is real. I would love. It's one of my missions, like to help like end the divorce between astronomy and so-called astrology, which is actually correspondences. I have actually helped some astronomers, like putting a straw in an orange at a party late night, like understand that the tropical zodiac is an astronomical device. Like I've done some really fun things there, but I'm not out to convert rationalist scientists. But for me, I can help astrologers actually understand that the chart is not just a map of the soul, which is beautiful, but it's also a map of the sky from a particular place on Earth in the moment of your birth. And I like to say, if we can renature astrology, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of these equations we use, right? And this aligns us also to the natural experience and natural time, and helps us stay human in this changing age of cyborgs and whatnot, right? So, but there's another piece to it for me, because I think I'll just tell the punchline without building up to it. I believe that the tropical zodiac is an energetic expression of a hexagonal crystal that lies at Earth's core.
I was hoping you would get to that.
Yeah, and that all planets have these hexagonal crystals. There's some acceptable science and seismic survey and supercomputer models that actually support this idea. And you can see on like the North Pole of Saturn, a gigantic regular hexagon that's 3 times the size of Earth in diameter, that stays aligned to the Saturn's cardinal directions. There's a storm, a regular hexagonal series of 6 storms at Jupiter's South Pole that also have that geometry. And I think those giant gas planets are just made of the kind of stuff that allows them to express their inner hexagon on their surface. And, the hexagon, which has 6 sides and 6 flats, has like a 12-fold energetic structure that looks like the seed of life in 2 dimensions and much more in 3 dimensions. And for me, that's like actually what the tropical zodiac is. It's aligned to Gaia's spine. It's a directional device. Okay. But so one of the reasons why I'm really interested, that's nothing I can ever prove, but I feel that if we can like not only accept that like tropical astrology works, that makes you ask this question, what the hell is it? And it's not based on the stars, like the signs and constellations don't align. That's like the straw man argument that modern rationalists use in their like stake to prove astrology fake, and they just stop there. Okay. But once you start seeing that this thing works and it's not aligned to the stars, then what is it? And people say, oh, it's seasonal. Well, tell somebody that Capricorn is the cold time and they live in Brazil. Or, try to rectify the truth that the sign could work in the same way for Liverpool and Maui, and try to tell me why, if you're saying that, oh, well, Taurus is this way because it's the sign of the middle of the spring, that would have anything to do with the moon swimming through that area of space, because the moon doesn't bring us seasons. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of issues with the philosophy and cosmology of astrology, because there's very few of us who are like, okay, well, what the hell is this thing? Or what in the heavens is this thing? And I found that it's not in the heavens, it's rather beneath our feet. And that there is this like hexagonal core, and it totally like works with the directional zodiac, which a tropical zodiac is. Okay. So one of the reasons why I'm really interested in that is, and why, Gator, you kind of brought me here is, I think if we can figure out what that thing is, we can harmonize with it and then rediscover the type of energy systems that like the ancients, the pyramid builders were utilizing. And then instead of burning shit, so I can push that button and turn a light on or turn that thing and get hot water out of it, I can work with earth positive energy, earth resonant energy, right? And of course, this is like in the Buckminster Fuller realm too. So I love like the bright side of the conspiracy. I always try to balance my rabbit holing with the light and the darkness and be seasonal there as well. And it's easier for me, quote unquote, Gemini Brett as a card carrying Scorpio sun sign being, to go into like the darker sides of the things. And it's like, dude, like the teacups, man, it's like generating pyramid energy to help the It's a Small World ride happen with free energy. So like, yes, I love it, right? Because it's very easy to get stuck in the propaganda side of the Disney realm, and then we can go into the other places for this podcast. It's a whole another episode, but we can talk about the hollow moon and the Stanley Kubrick thing, and which is another thing I love to do. Okay.
That was episode 1.
Yeah, right. It's a really interesting thing. For those of you who have reviewed episode 1, I think it's hilarious, however, on like some conspiracy rags, how they'll talk about on like the same page of the moon being hollow because Apollo, shot the lander back at the moon and the seismic devices were there and we could measure how it resonated like a bell. Then like lower on that same page, it's like the moon landings are fake. It's like, dude, you can't have both. You can't have they shot Apollo back at the moon and Apollo never went to the moon. Do you know what I mean? Like you got to pick one of those and then go for it. Fine. Like I'm down to rabbit hole in any direction with anyone at any time. You know what I mean? But we also need to keep our feet on the ground. So, and I'll just say this, like for me, the moon is an incarnational device who, just as we are reminded by the myths that Diana delivered Apollo's birth on Earth, the moon delivers sunlight into this place, Earth, where we have the appearance of time and space. Why? Because that's necessary for growth. Yeah, I'm like, I know that we are here to grow. This happens first through feeling. Feeling opens healing. Healing opens knowing. And our personal knowing is our personal growing. And our personal growing is the only way that the one and only thing ever will grow. That's the miracle of spirit reflected through soul into matter. Like this is at the heart of my cosmology, and it's reinformed my astrological approach. And it's completely based upon conversations I've had with the moon at night. So I like to call sunlight one light. The sun is not changing signs. The earth is changing the sun's sign. Right? Like we're all traveling together through space and that, but like Earth is orbiting the sun. So it's Earth's orbit of the sun, which changes the directional alignment of our spine, our planet's world tree, to the sun in space that brings the sun through the signs. It's different for the moon. The moon, in that moon orbiting Earth model, like the moon's actually moving against Earth's inner hexagon and moving through the signs, but it's Earth's inner hexagon that's like rearranging its position to the sun as Earth orbits the sun. Like the sun's signs are actually a result of the Earth's motions, not the sun's motions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The sun is one light. And there's an old cosmology. I'm not trying to sell this like in three-dimensional reality, which is a reality. There's an old cosmology that the sun or the stars are not these like nuclear furnaces in the sky, but rather just holes in the veil that's here to shield us from the one only light there ever was, is, and will be. Because if you saw it in its reality, you would just remember you are it, and then the gig is up. Right? So the sun is the big one.
You have to have the mystery.
The hole that we're closest to. Yeah. And the sun is the mystery. It is the great mystery. Like, again, go outside tonight and see which stars the moon's aligned to. Like, draw a picture. okay, go outside today and see what stars the sun is aligned to. Draw a picture, and then
I'm cheating.
I'll cover your ophthalmology bill. You'll go blind. You know? Actually, sorry, I'm broke. I'm not covering that. Like,
I was gonna say, oh, that's a big one.
Go Aztec style and look through onyx. Okay, we'll protect your eyeball. That's how they were rolling to watch eclipses back in the day, right? So the sunlight, it's this one light. And that for me is spirit, the one only thing that ever was and will be. In the moon's role is not to divide that light. Like for me, a soul is not some little piece of spirit that's impossible. It is the indivisible. The moon's role is to reflect that one only light in a unique way that will never repeat. And literally, like for me to show you how unique your entrance was, I don't even need Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn on the chart. Earth, moon, and sun will never align in the way they did in the moment of your becoming ever again. So moon, who I like to say puts the U in soul, S-O-L, the sun, to make S-O-U-L, the soul, is for me like literally this incarnational device who does not divide, but rather reflects the one light of the sun in a unique way that will never repeat. And that's where the soul is embodied here on earth. I like to show this geometrically. We're not going to do that here, but it's working with as we say in astrology, the circle of spirit, the crescent of soul, and the cross of matter, and how the matter is generated out of two circles, which make two crescents, and on and on and on. Okay. But the general idea is like the moon is literally this incarnational device. And so, there's all sorts of rabbit holders these days who talk about like the evil Saturn and moon is like the like repeating station for Saturn's evil radio station or whatever. I don't think it has to be evil, but I do think there's actually something to the truth that the moon was probably put here to assist in this like incarnational project for spirit to be reflected through soul and body and matter, so we can feel, heal, know, and grow. And that it's that growth that is the miracle, because the one only thing itself is everything, and therefore it's nothing, it can't grow, and yet it will never stop doing so because of miracles like you, who are spirit reflected through soul into matter. The moon, who also we say in astrology rules memory, rules forgetting, and she gives you the sauce that you drink on the way in, so you will forget what you actually are, so you can do a Gator, or I can do a Brett, I can do a Kayleigh, or whoever out there can do a Sally or a Jose or whatever it may be,
So it's not evil archons.
It's not about evil archons?
It's not evil archons doing it all.
It's not only about archons.
It's kind of ringing this bell to the show. I started watching Stargate Atlantis not too long ago because I really love cheesy sci-fi. And there's this episode where McKay and Shepard they found this ancient game room that the ancient ancestors were playing a video game, they thought. But later they found out that, there's a computer and you go in and you tell the society of how to build a perfect culture and a perfect society, and they thought it was a video game. Then they find out that there was actually satellites over this planet that was showing them back at their base, exactly what was happening. And they had a computer system that would go down to the planet and tell the people what the Oracle was telling them. And so the whole time they thought they were playing a game, they were actually creating and communicating with another, species on another planet and controlling their life and giving them wisdom and information. And then I was kind of mind blown by that, because the show does that. It kind of has like these small hints at like potentials and a lot of things that come up in a lot of different philosophical talks. But that's something huge that comes up with the moon, is like, was it placed here? Is it put here to give us that axis that we sit on? Is it like, you have this perfect a magnetic bowl and here, and they're all spinning, and then you just kind of throw like a little drip of mercury right there, or like you put your little magnet and it just hits this, and now it's controlling that, and it's giving us information. And I don't know. So there's so many beautiful directions to go with that. But that was a visual I got because I am currently watching the show Stargate Atlantis, and the moon.
You're inspiring me to do so.
Oh, you should. I love it.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't watch SG1,
if
but
it was. So Stargate Atlantis, I'm gonna go there. Yeah, I mean, I love the film Stargate. That's right in my wheelhouse.
so good.
Yeah, was the moon put here? I mean, some speak about like ancient times, like before the moon. There's an interesting book actually by a couple Masons called "Who Built the Moon" by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas.
Been trying to get
And they're kind of getting into some of that stuff and just the oddities around. I was describing the 108 before, but the moon, earth, sun metric, they're crazy. It would be so easy if we had a 360-day year, right?
That'd be
with
very
12
nice mathematically.
30-day months, like new moon to new moon.
Nice.
It would just like this conversation, like we wouldn't need to have this conversation. It's suddenly getting tricky and into all decimal points and stuff, And there's many ancient calendars that have 360 days. Like the Maya have one called the Tun. That's part of the long count system that, was very kind of, I don't know, popularized, but brought to a lot of people's attention, including mine, because of the 2012, synchronization. There was a Hebrew calendar of 360 days. In astrology, and one particular Hellenistic timing technique that modern students call zodiacal releasing, there's a period called the Egyptian year, which is 360 days that's utilized. Like we see these 360-day calendars in many places. And actually, it's clear to see that that's just wanting to relate the days of the year to like the degrees of a circle. A circle is not created, it's discovered. I think we can all agree. And the sun and the moon are great teachers of this in the sky. Is the 360 degree of a circle a creation? Probably, but you get really interesting when you get into like sexagesimal 60s and this system that comes out of like Mesopotamia and like Babylonia of like 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute in that. I kind of digress, but I want to tell another story. Like it's good to balance that mathy brain stuff with the mythic heart stuff.
Yeah.
There's a tale where Thoth amazingly, right? So Jehuti was like the name in Kemet, the place we now call Egypt, for one of these great Neteru or Neters, right? Which many think of in like the Egyptian pantheon of gods and goddesses, or more like natural principles. And Jehuti, who many relate to the Greek Hermes and the Roman Mercury, and to like planet Mercury and all these structures, because he brought us language and math and so much more. And I should say this along with his consort, who is Seshet, the lady of the measuring cord. Jehuti, in many ways, we can see as like the creator of these calendar systems. Many think of Jehuti or Thoth as like a moon god. And it's said, some say that he's often depicted with the head of the ibis bird, which I'm sure everyone listening is familiar with, but it looks something like a stork or a kind of in the heron family, the crane realm. That the beak of the ibis looks like a crescent moon. But Jehuti was not a moon god. And in fact, that comes into play into our story, because we're going to see that he battles with the moon god, whose name, why am I forgetting the Egyptian Okonsu, right? Just showed up on TV not long ago too. Anyway, Jehuti, I think I'll say this, and all my students will know this as one of my favorite things to speak about. Jehuti is typically shown either with the ibis bird head or with symbolized by the baboon. Now, the baboon, most people see as a celebration of the Earth's daily rotation, which in astronomy we call the primary motion of Earth, a day. And again, our primary motion of astronomy is day and night, and I would say astrologically as well. This has kind of been forgotten by many modern astrologers, I find. But baboons will literally compete for high ground before sunrise, right? So the winner gets the sunlight to their eyeballs first. And they scream and party and dance and jump and celebrate the rising sun. So many will suggest that the baboon, and we see like so many mummified baboons, not nearly as many as mummified ibis birds, right? But the baboon imagery with Thoth is a celebration of the day because baboons scream at the rising sun, okay? The only one I've heard yet argue that the ibis bird is then a celebration of the year. Because like the south in Egypt, they fly, or like the sun, they fly south for winter, right? Anyway, but there's also said to be this association with Thoth or Jehuti in the moon, and that's shown in the crescent of the ibis bird's beak. So the story is this, like, I don't know how far back we go. Well, so first there was Atum, right, who creates Earth, and then he gives birth in very interesting ways to these children, these twins, Tefnut and Shu, who are moisture and air, and they, in their love, give birth to another two twins, Jeb and Nut. Jeb is Father Earth or Brother Earth, and Nut is Sister Heavens. So you often see depictions in Kemet of these two, where Nut is often represented by the Milky Way, kind of arcing above Jeb, the earth, and only touching her fingers and her toes, and the rest of her is arc above, and in a sense in her sorrow, because they have this great love. But they, in a way, at least I'm sure in their own experience, were cursed to be separated, for he was the earth and she was the heavens, right? And Jehuti hears this plea from their hearts of their longing to be together. And it's said that for this to happen, since they were cursed to be separated for each of the 360 days of the year, that he would bring more years or more days by getting the moon to increase his light. Okay, so he battles Khonsu, this moon guide, again and again in the ancient game of Senate. And his demands for his winnings, and he did win, were that the moon increase its light. And in this extra light, somehow it makes 5 more days each year. And since these 5 days are outside of that 360-day curse, these are the times that Jeb and Nut can celebrate their love and consummate. And this is what brought twins who were, I'll use the Greek names, Osiris and Isis and Set and Nethys, right? You may know, like, Set kills Osiris, Isis brings him back, Set kills him again. He becomes the stars in the sky that these days we typically call Orion. And there's something very important about Orion's sword, which is this magical phallus that Osiris was offered by the creations of Isis and Jehuti, so that a child could be born, the son Horus, who defeats his uncle Set every day when the sun rises, and then is later defeated every evening when the sun sets. And that's why we use this word set for sunset. And we can go on and on and on. But I'm intrigued by this idea that perhaps this myth is offering a code that the year used to be 360 days. And something changed to now make a 365-day year, which of course is 365 and a quarter. So there's actually many calendars, and we can speak about this. Maybe we'll get to Mayan time. Maybe that's for a different time, or maybe it's not for this podcast anyway. But that will use a cycle of 360 days and then have these like 5 extra days. So like in Roman times, and there's an Egyptian calendar, maybe an Athenian calendar, where there's like, how would this one work? 36 periods of 10 days. So, I guess it would be kind of similar to a week. And that gives you the 360 days. And then you have these 5, some call them like days out of time, to use this modern expression where like debts are forgiven, or you have to do all this purification to get ready for the year ahead, etc. Right? So I've often wondered of like, is there some astronomical code in that great myth? Like, if the moon gets closer to the Earth and therefore bigger in our sky and therefore brighter, especially at full moon time, I believe, and it's been a while since I achieved my engineering degree, but I believe this would cause the Earth to rotate faster slightly if the moon was closer. And if we're rotating faster, that means we will spin more times in any period, like a year. So that could literally shift a year from 360 days to 365 in about a quarter days. I mean, it might even be before the moon, it was 360 days, and then the moon came in and went to 365 or whatever. I'm more kind of aligned to the idea that the moon was already here, but got pushed closer somehow. And then we literally shifted from this kind of 360-day experience, maybe even like a 12, 30-day months a year, with the sun spending exactly 30 days in each sign. But that's ridiculous, because that would actually imply like circular orbits, and I don't think that was ever the case. But I do, for me, it's like I hear these myths and I'm autistically astronomical. But I always looking for the astronomy, like codes hidden within them, you know? But yeah, what the moon is and where did she come from and all that, you know, I mean, this is kind of like an interesting segue into finding our way to silver time. It's just so much more mysterious than we could ever know. And I'm sad, like when I go out and I'm out and about and I'm like having like a moon ceremony, as I often do, and I see kids in the street and it's like, hey, we're going to do this moon ceremony tonight. He's like, oh, you mean that like an evil hollow device full with the Nephilim that are watching us to prepare for Judgment Day? And it's like, yeah, you know, like, and it's going to be super bright. Like, let's go and celebrate that. You're like a little bit, people are a little bit too twisted in like the David Icke rabbit hole. You know, I mean, there's cats I think who are bringing really important information and asking us to step outside of the bounds of the constructs that would say we're allowed to think this way and not that way. Again, I think every question should be able to be asked and we should explore that. And I am no stranger to the rabbit holes, but we got to remember we're going to dig to find the carrots and the gems and bring them back, you know? And I think that people who are like just been convinced that the moon is evil, how sad. Right? Because she's still going to be in your sky.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot to diverge on a lot of things, but I wanted to ask you, do you own I'm going to butcher this word. It's called an orrery. You know, the old mechanisms?
I don't.
Man, those things are so cool.
I have a bunch of like, this is an armillary sphere here. By the way, it's completely astronomically inaccurate, and I can't find one that is not.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's like somebody got it off at one point, and then they just started copying this wrong one. There's actually like 4 different type of wrong armillaries that I see. Like completely. I've got a kit where I can build one, and I'm excited to. But like the armillary sphere is an amazing device. This one behind me. Oh my gosh, why am I spacing? Kayleigh, do you remember what this device is called?
I don't remember what it's called.
Oh my God, wow, I'm totally
super
spacing.
cool.
This is another one of the old devices where we can tell time by day working with the sun's position, and also by night by working with the star's position. I'm like embarrassed.
I love those. The time when there was people, you know, so obsessed with the sky, and you know, before we were so, you know, technologically obsessed, when we were obsessed with the technology of how do we bring the stars in the heavens down to here? How do we calculate it? That was a time, there was an obsession when culture was like that. And, you know, funny enough, talking about the Gregorian calendar switch, like that was around the time of these really famous astronomers of Tycho Brahe, because 1589 was right in the time, right before the Reformation, right before the Renaissance, where you had Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, John Dee, and, you know, that whole crew was just about, and the Prague astronomical clock, if I'm not mistaken, was just about to be or was being built or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of myth behind when and how, but those old devices really are
Yeah,
interesting.
they're like, hey, burn that guy at the stake, but make sure you write it down first.
Yeah, get all his books, burn him. Yeah. Let's use all his fun stuff that he has, and we'll keep it. We'll keep it in our
the
basement.
books in the closet. Yeah, sorry, Gator. I'm interrupting you, but it's just because we're having some kind of weird Zoom feedback loop or something. So we're out of time, out of sync. Yeah, I mean, it's said interestingly. So as I was saying before, Jehuti, like his consort is called Seshet. Like you don't get to see Seshet too much in the temples out there. There's some where she's really well featured, but she's typically shown with like the rod and the cord, which shows up in like the Inanna myths. Inanna being Venus. From Mesopotamia and many other places. And she's said to be the lady of the measuring cord. And like, I often like invoke her and express her, like share her with students or my love for that energy. Because there's part of like what it is to embody, like measuring the heaven and earth is like part of the human, it's part of our job, and maybe not for everyone. Usually, when I go there, people are like, "No, that's not natural. Like that's really cold. That's like science walking around with a ruler." Like in fact, I teach like so-called sacred geometry, where we work with the geometer's tools of the compass, which curves, and the rule, which lines. But in sacred geometry, you want to measure things. Like your rule does not have notches on it. You know what I mean? Like, and if you ever see something, like, oh, this is how you draw this thing, and then measure this, and it's like, no, that's not the old way, right? And yet, like measuring the days, keeping the days, measuring space, seeing these strange links between time and space. Like, you and I were taught that a foot was some like Pharaoh's foot length, and 5280 of those is a mile for who knows why. And yet we find then the miles of the moon's diameter equivalent to the years of an astrological age, and the miles of Jupiter's diameter equivalent to the number of seconds in a day. Right? Like Randall Carlson's work, by the way, is like a really intriguing place to go pursue some of those unifications of like time and space metrics. Yeah, there's a whole bit that he did, a great little movie that was made from his lectures that I think can still be accessed for free at YouTube. That's like you can just search Randall Carlson and cycles of catastrophe. But he gets into some really cool things around time and space measurement there. And his
work
website
is amazing.
sacredgeometryinternational.com if people want to go right to the source. Really cool teacher. Anyway, all right. So let's get to the silver. Let's get to the moon. Let's get to the rabbit world. Because wouldn't it be nice if we did have our months aligned to moons? Okay, so what are they? And again, there's many types of months. Okay, so the ones that I've not ever found employed in like calendar keeping are the draconic month of moon, from like her northern crossing of the ecliptic back to the northern crossing, Dragon's Head to Dragon's Head. That one's about 27.5 days long. The animalistic month is intriguing, and Gator, I have a love like you do for like these gigantic ancient like brass devices that you find in the wizard's tower. Yes. And like the Chinese astronomers' temples and whatnot. Like one that I've been kind of working on is like, oh, can I have a device where if I'm standing a certain distance from it and has these different kind of like holes cut in it, it can tell me how far the moon is from the earth, right? Or like in general, is the moon big or small? Okay, because every month the moon gets closest to Earth and furthest away. That's called the anomalistic month. You can see that in the chart, by the way. Moon conjoined true black moon Lilith is when moon is furthest from Earth. So Lilith, a whole nother conversation, but I like to call Lilith far moon Lilith or slow moon Lilith, because when moon is far, moon is also slow. So keeping month time is a beautiful thing. Right. And literally planting and harvesting by the phases of the moon, a beautiful thing. So the phases of the moon, as we were describing so long ago, now the synodic month, where synod means meeting. So the monthly meeting or conjunction of moon and sun in Earth's sky. The new moon, though the new moon is a no moon, right? So most calendars who were keeping synodic months or lunations, or the phases of the moon to time their months, which is what the Chinese calendar does, Happy New Year, or the Hebrew calendar does, most of them do not begin the month with the conjunction. It said there is an Egyptian lunar calendar. This is really a solely lunar or lunisolar calendar that actually worked with the conjunctions. So that's going to be a mathematical thing, or you can say, all right, like I saw her disappear the last waxing crescent moon, which some called Hecate's bow, like yesterday, or 2 days ago, and then didn't see her yesterday. And then today I saw Diana's bow, right, which is the waning crescent moon. And so the day in between must have been when the moon and the sun conjoined. And so we can like align our calendar there. And then you can play with this thing mathematically, but it gets tricky. Okay, so we talked about Apollo's bow before as the crescent sun during a solar eclipse, right? Diana's bow is a lot easier to find because it happens every month. And it is the waxing crescent, the sliver crescent moon that you see the day or two after new moon, after the moon-sun conjunction, and always where? In the sunset west. So the sun sets, and then we see the sliver crescent bow, which is Diana aiming her arrows at her brother Apollo, who is just set below, right? Diana's bow, the first moon or visible moon of the month, right? Of the synodic month or the lunation. Now, this is why many calendars actually start their days at sunset. Because if you're going to align your months to the first visible appearance of the moon after the moon-sun conjunction, that happens at sunset. So if that's the first day of your month, then a day later, it's the next sunset, the next sunset, right? Like even in Galileo's astrology chart, yes, Galileo was an astrologer too. He writes the time of his birth at the top of the chart that we see him working on. Once in the convention that was used in Pisa, Italy at the time of his birth, which is measuring time from the previous day's sunset. And then we see him using the new convention, which is this whole AM, PM thing. It was pretty interesting. People have argued since one says February 15th and the other says February 16th. It's like bad data, but it's actually the same, just using one from the old convention of from previous days sunset and the new convention of AM, PM. Okay. So this is why actually many cultures begin their days at sunset, because they're working with a lunar calendar. Now, and let me speak Northern Hemisphere here, okay? So like the Hebrew calendar, the Chinese calendar, and these Northern Hemisphere experiences. If you go and watch that Diana's bow, right? Moon delivering sunlight to Earth, that waxing crescent bow. In Hawaii, they call this the Hilo moon. And they have a name for every day of the moon's shape as her smile grows until she's full O and then shrinks till a smile again, the waning crescent times. The next day, you're going to find at sunset that the moon has moved to the left. And because she's getting further from sun in our point of view, she's also growing, right? So we get to see more of the moon's reflection of sunlight to Earth. She's growing and growing and growing until she's full. The full moon rises at sunset. So if you watch from new moon or visible new moon time and you go out at sunset for the 2 weeks between then and when the moon is full, you're going to see her from one day or one evening to the next, moving from the right to the left across your sky as she waxes. And I so far have found that every culture who's keeping a lunar phase month calendar is also reading and writing from the right to the left. And I'm sure this is why. I was taught to read and write from the left to the right because I was born into this solar God calendar, okay, of 12s. So let's talk 12s and 13s. And I'm going to go into kind of hurry up mode because I know we don't have too much time, but that's okay. The moon in 13 is an interesting thing. Like in the calendar year of 2022, we actually had 13 new moons. In 2023, we'll have 12. In 2024, we'll have 12. I imagine in 2025, we'll have 13, but I'd actually have to check. But it's typically about every 3 years that you get 13 new moons. What is a year? We know that. When does the year begin? Okay. That's going to change the years where you get 13 versus 12. There are, and this is where the math gets tricky, not 12 or 13 lunations, like new moon to new moon, in a year. There's 12.37. There's 12 and about a third. All right.
Who's
and
counting?
Well, who's counting? We are. You're right. And this is an issue, right? Because if you want to align your months to the moon, what a beautiful thing to do. Even there, we have some issues, which I will return to. If there were 12 or 13, it would be super easy, but there's not. There's 12 and about a third. Okay, so let's first talk about the length of the synodic month. I should say we didn't cover one, which is the sidereal month, which is the moon aligning to like a star in your sky or a direction of Earth. That's like 27 and a third days. So if you see the moon with the Pleiades, she'll be back there with the Pleiades about 27 and a third days later. But she'll be in a bit of a different phase because that sidereal month, the month of the moon with the stars, 27.32 days. And the synodic month, the moon with our star, the sun, 29.5 days. Okay. Now you go in between and you get 28. So people are like, one's 27, one's 29. So 28, it's like, fuck you, pardon my language. But neither of those are 28. And the moon does not 28. There's an eclipse thing that can kind of work with that as a skeleton key, but we're not going there. Okay. So let's stay with the lunation, 29 and a half days. Well, how do you even do that? Like if you want to create a calendar, are you going to start 1 month at sunset? And then the next month, 29 and a half days later at like sunrise? No, what you're going to do is stick with one or the other. So if you're doing a sunset calendar, okay, what you do to keep the 29 and a half day pace is you alternate between months of 29 days and 30 days. Mm-hmm. And that goes way back. That's like in the Babylonian construct, in the Chinese construct, whatever. Like anyone who wants to like be able to just keep natural time, you honor the 29 and a half day lunation or synodic month by alternating between months of 30 and 29. Okay, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29. So 12 of those, right? If you just multiply 29 and a half by 12, or 29 times 6 plus 30 times 6, you're going to get 354. So this is often called the silver year, 354 days, which is calendar, lunar, like silver calendar time. I shouldn't even call it lunar because, again, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about moon reflecting sunlight to earthly eyes. We're talking about all three things when we follow the phases of the moon. It's a really beautiful thing, like Easter, right? And the kind of Gregorian reset. The way that Easter is done now is the first Sunday after the full moon, after spring equinox, or I should say Aries equinox to make it more global, right? Intriguingly, that ties together the magical days of the week. Sunday is Sun's day, Monday is Moon's day, Tuesday, Marte is Mars's day, Wednesday, Miércoles is Mercury's day, Thursday, Jueves, Jupiter's day, Friday, Viernes, Venus's day, okay? Like, it's a solar culture, so it's got to be on a Sunday, but that works with these 7 days, right, of the planets, the visible wanderers. Then you get the sun, moon, earth, it's got to be after the full moon. Then you get the earth, sun, it's after equinox. So, regardless of what you think about, that religion or whatever, like it's pretty amazing that this idea of the sun's crucifixion and the rebirth is tied to the 7 magical days of the week and to the lunation, earth, moon, sun, and to the earth, sun relationship equinox. Okay. So 7 days in a week itself, well, that seems to be a quarter of 28, right? Because if you're taking this 29 and a half day cycle, and you quarter it, it's about 7 days between new moon or no moon and the waxing half where you get that straight edge in the moon's face, which just seems so not moon. She's such a curvy being and you get that straight line. It's one of the only straight lines you see in the sky ever, And then about a week between the waxing half moon and the full moon. And about 7 days between the full moon and the waning half moon, right? And about 7 days between there. But they're not exactly 7 days because we're quartering the cycle of 29 and a half, okay? And also, it's not exactly 29 and a half. So this causes all sorts of other issues. The lunation on average, new moon to new moon, or you could go full moon to full moon, but that one's harder to measure because the day before and the day after full moon look pretty full too. It's 29.53059 days. Right. so that's a mess. That makes things much more difficult. But even if we just say 29 and a half days and you alternate between 29 and 30 to keep that 29 and a half day pace, you get this 354 day silver year. Okay, well, what's the issue? It's not a year. So if you like food, because you like things like life, you're going to have to calibrate that to the golden year, to the Earth Sun year of seasons, right? Because that's going to tell you when the berries are on the bushes and the herds over there, and when you plant your seeds and harvest them and all that. Yeah. There are cultures like, I think it's the right description, the Islamic calendar, which is timing its months to months in that synodic cycle of moon and sun. It does not recalibrate to the seasons, but the Hebrew calendar, the Chinese calendar does. And you do this by throwing in a leap month about every 3 years, okay? Because the silver year of 354 days, the 12 lunations alternating between 29 and 30-day months of 354 days is about 11 days short of the 365 and about a quarter day year, right? So after 3 of these, you're now 33 days off. Interesting number. And so then you throw in a month to recalibrate. You throw in a leap month. Well, the issue is your months can only either be 29 or 30. So you keep the 29 and a half day pace of new moon to new moon, you see? So you can't just throw in a 33-day month, or now your new month is not going to throw in 29 or 30. And it depends where you're throwing it in, which one you choose, to keep not only your months tuned to the moon, but to recalibrate to the sun, but you're not doing so exactly. The trippy thing is this. These two rhythms, which by the way, it's not exactly 354 days. That's what it is on the page, right? But if you multiply 29.53059 times 12, you're going to get 354 and change. It's about 354 and a third of a day. And it's about 11 days short of the year. Like those rhythms can synchronize. That's the weirdest thing about this whole trip. Like if I ask you what number synchronizes 3 and 4, astrologers are like modalities and elements. The number is 12, okay? If I ask you to synchronize 29.53059 with 365.242199, like good luck. And the most amazing and miraculous thing is they do synchronize. And it happens every 19 years, which these days most call the Metonic cycle after the Greek astronomer Meton, even though this was figured out by the calendar keepers from many cultures well before him. But regardless, that every 19 years, the Earth-Sun cycle, right? So the solar year, golden time, and the Earth-Moon cycle, so the silver time, synchronize in such a way that 19 solar years, Earth orbiting the sun, is equivalent to 235 lunations. Okay. And the way that this works intriguingly is this. Within this 19-year period, you have 12 years with 12 months. So 12 years with no leap month, right? And then you get 144. And 7 years of 13 months. So 7 of these years have a leap month, right? And astrologers, traditionally we have 7 planets, 12 signs. The 13 is a number of the goddess, number of the moon. Let me just say a thing about that. It's not because there are 13 moons a year. If you want to like synchronize silver and golden time, there are 7 years out of 19 where you have to use a leap month, okay? But the moon moves on average 13 degrees per day. That's an average, because sometimes she's much closer to Earth and then she's moving like 15 to 16, and other times she's further away and then she's moving like 11 or 12 degrees per day. But average, not only 13, but 13 and a third degrees per day, which I don't know if you've spoken about nakshatras or lunar mansions here yet. That's why like they are that size. Okay. There's other reasons why the 13, and I think beautifully expressed by Venus and her sacred cycles, comes through as like a goddess number. Friday, Venus's day, Friday the 13th, though, yes, it was a day that Templars were burned. The whole reason why it was burned is because it used to be the practice to lock your doors and make love all day, to worship like the goddess and her realities, because Friday is Venus's day and the 13 is a goddess number. But that doesn't mean that there's 13 28-day months a year and that we should practice that to realign to nature, because that's not what nature does. So, yeah, I wish we had another 2 hours. Well, that's what the system does. And again, we're here to measure the Earth and also create systems that can work, right? So that we can stay aligned to time. It's just not like to just say, oh, well, 13 times 28 is 364, and then you just do an extra day. Like, you're just as unnatural as switching between 31 and 31, 30 and 28, which is sometimes 29 and that. Okay. So I want to finish just because I said I would before. We're not going to get so into Mayan time, but let me just say that if you want to start realigning to natural time, simply follow the moon, as of course you too, and everyone here listening do and does, right? It's like new moon, waxing moon, full moon, waning moon, new moon. I like to teach the phases in 12s to have it aligned to astrological aspects. And you can find my work at GeminiBrett.com, by the way. There's a place where you can go to a sacred astronomy course where I get deep into this stuff. And the nice thing is you get images and animations and all sorts of things that will help this land for you. Because like we're here using words and like the air body, but we need the earth body, right, of the senses too. And like at least moving pictures help us get closer. But you got to get away from the small screen and out to the big screen, which is the living sky. And if you work with and celebrate the earth and the moon and the sun, right? Like I elder, I try to keep my mouth shut, but I watched an elder give a lecture recently, and she said, you know, you see the sun by day, but you don't see the sun by night. You see the moon by night and you see the moon by day. And I was like, that's true about the moon, but I've seen sunlight at night. She's like, what? And it's like, yeah, the moon. or like Jupiter or Saturn. Like these are all mirrors of sunlight to Earth, right? So you just go outside and like it's these simple things. We're like, oh, right? Like so much of the astrological code, like these weird mysterious things that we learn, they are written in the book of nature. So you got to get out to the big screen and do that work, and or do that play or do that remembrance. If you just follow new moon to new moon and celebrate the new moons and the full moons, like you are naturally realigning to natural time without having to really think about it so much, right? And if you follow the sun through the signs, you're also aligning yourself to the hexagon, which is a very natural expression of Earth Sun and keeping the seasons and the like, right? The leap day, and you know, this is going to be kind of forced here in the rush of us having no time, but I want to just say this because I promised I would earlier. There's a the Maya have this 260-day count. What that is astronomically is kind of unknown, and it's a very long story. But they also have a year calendar called the Hub, and it's 365 days long. And typically it's argued that it did not employ a leap day. And what happens there, just like the Julian calendar started slipping from, you know, Easter from equinox or whatever, like it will precess or move backwards through the seasons over this great period of time. But there are some suggestions now, and there's some cool, like, calendrical support for this, that maybe what the Maya, and I shouldn't just say the Maya, it's like the Olmec, the Mexica, like many traditions down there, we're actually employing a system of much more organic leap day. And this is what, like, my calendar culture, my crew, my commune's gonna do, okay? My cult, our cult, is instead of just adding a day every 4 months and then, or every 4 years, and then not every 100 years, but yes, every 400 years, and then the whole thing I went through before, all you do is 1 year, you start your days at sunrise. And you have 365 days that start at sunrise. And then the next day starts at midday. Because you just organically added that quarter of a day. And then you do a midday year. And the next year you do a sunset year. And the next year you do a midnight year. Now this will also align you to the directions and to the cycles, to like the very important truth why 4 and incarnation and matter and squares. I'll speak about these things. And you know, your midnight year is a year of like darkness and maybe rebirthing, and your sunrise year is like a year of hope, and your midday year is a year of like blessings of the light, and your sunset year is a year of like respecting that transition into the darkness, right? And the sun and midnight year is like the celebration of rebirthing from the darkness and the like, right? And so you can actually align yourself energetically to nature and the days and the years, and then using the months within.
Sounds like a fun
So
call.
let's create a calendar. Let's create a culture that celebrates natural time like this, and actually dance to the rhythms of silver and gold in our earthly skies.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Brett. That was really fantastic. I do have to run now, but if you feel there's more to speak on for silver time, and there always is, especially with you, but we can come back for round 2 or 3 if we need to. But thank you so much, Brett. I very much appreciated you coming on and talking astrology and astronomy with us, because that's not my strong suit, but that's where you've studied the most. So I very much appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's one of my favorite things to teach. Frankly, it's a little bit easier right now than a lot of the correspondences, because astronomy kind of has right and wrong answers. and you know, like with the astrology, there's so much challenge for me personally at this dynamic times of like speaking truth versus self-censoring so that I can be heard. You know, and walking that razor's edge has been a really tricky thing. But I also I have such a fondness for astronomy and helping astrologers like reclaim their astronomical, or as I like to say, earth-astronomical connection, that it's also one of my favorite things to teach. So it's my pleasure to be here and to be invited to share with you today. Let's talk hollow moons and Disney World another time, because that's a fun thing too. And I'll just say I haven't figured out exactly when it's going to launch yet, but I am going to build specifically a course around time and days and months and years and hours. Sorry about the barking dog. So like if you go there in this moment, I'm not sure by the time this broadcast it'll probably be active, but you can go to geminibrett.com/time and you can find out about this little mini course that I'll be teaching. We'll have some live component and then a lot of work outside also. Gemini Brett employs twin T's, Gemini T's, okay? So brett.com. Come find me.
And on the subject of courses and webinars, aren't you doing something with Daniel Giamario regarding the lunar standstill?
Yeah, Daniel and I are going to teach a lunar standstill like in astronomy, practice, spirituality, and sacred sites. It's probably going to be a February-March thing. I'll be teaching astronomy for Kepler College. We think starting in January. We're still kind of waiting to see. That should actually be super soon. I want to start it with the first visible moon, but I might want to wait till spring where the skies are clearer, actually globally. So we're still actually just today I'm having a conversation about that. But yeah, GeminiBrett.com is a place where you can sign up for my mailing list and learn about all these things. And you can also find there the teachings of the golden year, which Kayleigh, I know you've been through with me. There's a lot there. Go learn about there. And then also a sacred astronomy class, which is up online if you want to take at your own pace. like a deep dive into some of these mysteries, and much more than what I shared today. But to do it live as well, like I'll be teaching for Kepler College this year for the Organization for Professional Astrology. I really love to teach astronomy for astrologers, and I'm going to do that like in little mini courses throughout the year, just on my own as well. So GeminiBrett.com/time will soon be an active place where you can go and find out about a place of getting down. We're like literally in the end, we will create a calendar together.
Oh, that is
all right.
Super sweet. Everybody better go check out the website and do some courses, because I definitely have been debating doing such myself, because I feel that, you know, as an homage to the mysteries, it shouldn't even be a mystery. It should just be a part of our life again, as it once was, you know, bringing it back into the culture. So I appreciate you, and this has been a great chat.
I can't agree more. And these things like sound weird and difficult when we try to describe them in words, especially once the decimal point shows up into it, right? But like going outside, it's like a very natural thing. And speaking of, Gator, you're like closer to me than I thought. So let's hang out and look at the stars together sometime. Kayleigh, obviously that goes for you, but you're going to be good on a plane.
Gotta smuggle me across the border, man.
Yeah. All right, friends, thank you so much for having me on. And I can't share love for the moon enough. So I'm glad you're doing it with the world, and I hope to have another adventure with the moon rabbit and you sometime in the future.
Totally. All right. Have a lovely day, everybody. This has been Moon Mysteries.
Moon
Signing
Mysteries.
off. See you again.